Well, an official good morning to everyone. I now reconvene the general session. Will the recording secretary please call roll?
Catherine Williams Brown.
Here.
Jose Cardenas.
Present.
C. Michael Cooney.
Here.
Michael De La Torre.
Present.
Marisol De La Torre Escobedo.
Here.
Anna Marie Francois. Makita Grinnell Shire.
Present.
Megan Gross.
Present.
Johanna Harwick.
Here.
Susan Heredia.
Here.
Harry Jackson.
Here.
Bonnie Clark.
Present.
Monica Martinez.
Here.
David Simmons.
Here.
Tina Sloan.
Here.
Andrew Wall.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. I'd like to remind members of the public about the new process to provide public comment. The committee chair will announce when the public comment period is open during the presentation of the agenda item and ask for anyone who wishes to comment to notify the meeting moderator. The way you notify the meeting moderator is that individuals who have joined by Zoom will need to click on the raise hand icon to inform the meeting moderator that you'd like to speak on the item. The meeting moderator will notify the individual when it's their turn to speak by calling their Zoom ID. Please remember that the Zoom ID is the name used when logging into the meeting. At the same time, the individual will be prompted to unmute their microphone and will be able to share their comment. Please note that the Zoom ID name used by the member of the public to join the Zoom meeting will be displayed to the public when the individual provides public comment. Individuals who join the meeting via US toll-free number will need to press *9 on their phone to inform the meeting moderator that they'd like to speak on the item. The moderator will notify the individual it's their turn to speak by calling the last 4 digits of their phone number and will allow them to unmute their telephone. At that time, the individual will be prompted to press *6 and will be able to share their comment. Please note that only the last 4 digits of the caller's number will be displayed to the public when the individual provides public comment. All right, and these instructions are also on the meeting agenda. All right, I'll now recess the general session and move to the Educator Preparation Committee. Commissioner Martinez, will you please reconvene the committee?
Great. Just looking at a quick email, I think we're going to change some order of things. So welcome, good morning, everyone. It's a big day today. Not only are we in a heat wave, but hello, President Biden signed the bill, making Juneteenth an official holiday. As we all know, Juneteenth marked the official end of slavery in Texas, which was the last state to acknowledge emancipation. And this is why I live in California. And then CBS featured a story today about the teacher shortage and the impact of the pandemic. So it's nice to get that information out to the public as well. So with that in mind, I would like to reconvene the Educator Preparation Committee. Lo and behold, we have 8 items this morning. We're going to reverse the order just a little bit. I'm going to look at this right here, and we're going to start with items 2A, and then go to 4G, 4G, for F, 4G. I can't do my alphabet. H, and then we'll go back to 4C, 4D, 4E, and then I'll finally end with 4J. That's not too much, right? So happy to have all your all's attention today on these really key issues. We're going to start therefore. Let me scroll on down.
Monica, Commissioner Martinez, could you repeat that order again?
I will, because I think I have to repeat it for myself. Okay, we're going to go with items. Are we doing 2A first, Executive Director?
No, we're not doing 2A. We're starting with
4F, G,
F, G, and H.
Yep.
Yes.
And then we'll go back to 4C, D, and E, I, and then J. You know, would it be okay if I dropped this in the chat or?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
How used we are now to Zoom that we drop things in the chat. Yes, Executive Director Sandy?
There is no chair.
Just wanted to let you know that so no chat according to our team here, but we have some time certain appearances, people who are appearing for the initial institutional review items. So we were planning to keep those on schedule and then pick up where we left off yesterday and push through. Okay.
Great. Makes lots of sense. Thank you, Haiju, and thank you, Executive Director Sandy. Okay, so we're going to start with 4G. 4F. I really don't have my alphabet straight this morning. It's a Friday. Okay, 4F, initial institutional approval, stage 3, consideration of provisional approval for Folsom Cordova Unified School District. This item is being presented by Hart Boyd. This is an action item. Mr. Boyd, will you please begin?
Thank you. It is my pleasure to bring forward today the first of 3 institutions currently in stage 3 of the initial institutional approval process. This item presents Folsom Cordova Unified School District's responses to all relevant preconditions and the common standards for the Commission's consideration and possible provisional approval. As a reminder, although provisional approval authorizes an institution to offer educator preparation programs, each proposed program must still go through the initial program approval process in stage 4 to determine alignment to the program standards. These programs will then be brought before the Committee on Accreditation, who may either approve or deny the programs. For the purposes of today, the Commission is asked to consider the institution's responses to the preconditions, which are concerned with institutional and program compliance, and the responses to the common standards, which are generally concerned with institutional infrastructure and support for each proposed program. At the table, we have Folsom Cordova USD's Assistant Superintendent, Curtis Wilson, and the Teacher Induction Coordinator, Mindy Andrus. They will be here to answer any institutional or program questions you may have regarding their submission responses. Folsom Cordova USD has submitted responses to the required program preconditions, including the 2 initial program preconditions and the teacher induction preconditions. The review of the preconditions submitted by Folsom Cordova USD was completed by staff, and all have been found to be met. A summary of these responses can be found on pages 4 to 8, and a link to the institution's full preconditions responses can be found on page 3. Folsom Cordova USD has also submitted responses to the common standards, and this submission was reviewed by a team of 2 Board of Institutional Review members. The team collaborated and came to a consensus on the final finding of aligned on all common standards. Excerpts and information from Folsom Cordova USD's common standard submission are provided and begin on page 9. Also, a link to their full common standards response can be found on page 3. Based on the findings of met for all preconditions and aligned for all common standards, staff recommends provisional approval for Folsom Cordova USD. It is recommended that the provisional approval be for a period of 3 years so that in the 3rd year, a site visit could occur and data could be collected. After the site visit, a report would be completed and brought before the Commission for consideration of Folsom Cordova USD's full approval. With that, staff is available for any process questions. And again, we have representatives from Folsom Cordova USD to answer any institutional or programmatic questions. Thank you.
Okay. Is anyone going to present from Cordova, or we're just going to move forward with public comment? Mr. Hart, Mr. Boyd?
There's generally not, a formal sort of presentation from the institution. It's kind of you just ask questions regarding their submissions.
All right, just wanted to check in because I'm trying to find everyone on my Hollywood squares here. All right, so we're now going to be open for public comment. If there are members of the public that would like to give a presentation, please notify the meeting moderator by clicking on the raise hand icon if participating through Zoom, or pressing *9 if participating by phone. Recording secretary, are there any public comments?
Just allowing a moment to see if we receive any, and it does not appear that we have any requests at this time.
Okay. Thank you as we transition to this new system. Okay, the public comment period then is closed for this item. Do commissioners have any questions or comments on this item? And you can also raise your virtual hand. Okay, I see Commissioner Klatt.
Good morning, thank you. I have a question, and I'm sorry, I was looking through the documents and I wasn't able to find something. And so I was hoping that the team from Folsom could explain, or Folsom Cordova could explain a little bit more about who the mentors will be, what the process will be for selecting the mentors, and how you will structure that. It says that there's a minimum of an hour per week that the mentors will spend with the teachers in the induction program. Can you explain a little bit more about when that hour will occur within the schedules of the teachers who are participating?
Good morning. I'll go ahead and take that, Superintendent Wilson. So thank you and good morning, everyone. We're very happy to be here. Yes, our mentors, we go through a process with our mentors. We do have an application process and they must submit multiple documents. They have, there's a requirement of years of teaching and leadership skills, recommendation from their current administrator. So we do have a process that we go through. And our mentors they do resubmit and reapply every 3 years. So we cycle through to make sure that we're keeping updated with their qualifications and with their skills. So that's how the process works. We do open it up. We open our poll up almost every spring, and we do a hiring poll, and that's kind of the process. And I don't know, Ms. Cladd, if you had any more questions about the onboarding process or that before I move to the time.
No, actually, my question was going to be about the time, but you're moving there. So
sure. I'm moving there. Yes, of course, there is a minimum of 1 hour per week for an average, or for a total of 40 hours per year. And what we do is we have several meetings. Some are longer, some are shorter, but the average is always 1 hour per week. We do work with the teacher's schedule to find out when is the best time for them to meet. So we accommodate, our mentors accommodate the new teachers in the program to ensure that it's a good time when they have time to focus and collaborate with their mentor. And again, when they're preparing for certain things, sometimes they'll meet for 2 hours, but and sometimes it's just more of a short check-in, but it is always an hour per week. And again, it's based on what the needs are. So we offer the just-in-time support. As sometimes, like I said, if someone's having a crisis or a problem, my mentors usually will spend more time until they feel like things are resolved or the tools have been given to the new teacher so that they can move forward and the roadblocks have been removed. But on the average, when things are running smoothly, it is 1 hour per week.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Of course.
So if the mentors, I'm assuming, have a full-time teaching assignment, and so would this be happening? Would there be some sort of common prep? Would it be before school, after school, lunchtime? I guess how would you ensure that there is times in the day that's actually available for them to meet together?
Those are all great questions. Yes, of course. So initially, when our mentor matches happen and they meet each other for the first time, we have a little checklist, and we have some of the things we go through. One is scheduling, and that is when they sit down and try to determine when the best time is. We try to have our mentors on the same campus as our teachers that they're mentoring. Sometimes that doesn't always happen. We do use retired teachers that work in our mentor pool. We have about 5 or 6 of our 30, and so they're more flexible with their time. They can come on campus a little more often or more flexible. But our mentors, they find the time. Sometimes it's during prep, sometimes it's before school, sometimes it might be at a coffee shop after school. But all efforts are made by our mentors to be flexible and available when needed. And again, using proximity as one of our strategies for matching, that makes it so convenient because they can have those informal conversations when they can just drop into each other's classrooms or areas, or again, it can be set, the set schedule time can also be more convenient because they're together. Now, of course, that doesn't always happen. In the wonderful, perfect world, we would all have many mentors on each campus, but sometimes they do have to travel. And so that's when they work through that scheduling situation to find out when the best time is. So they're very creative when it comes to making that time work. Sometimes this last year, we've done a lot of these kind of conferences on Zoom or on Teams, where they were able to very quickly meet with each other whenever was convenient. So that's kind of how we make it happen. Like I said, we set up a regular schedule, but then there's always compensate or dispensations for just-in-time support when it's needed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clapp.
Thank you. We have a question by Chair Sloan.
Good morning. I was really compelled by the text around the demonstration of need in your district and how much need for new teachers that you are projecting both now and in future. And you stated that already you're finding that you're having to hire intern teachers and temporary teachers and teachers serving on less than full credentials. And you're anticipating that you will need to have a lot more newly credentialed teachers in your district. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll take that one. That's absolutely correct. As we're seeing across the state and across the nation right now, there's definitely, we're all vying for the same teacher pool at this point. And we have the added challenge that our district has substantial planned growth south of Highway 50. We have our first new school opening up this August, and with another plan to basically double our enrollment in the next 15 years from 20,000 to 40,000 students. So you can imagine that definitely spurred this need for us to seek our own induction program, just to be a little quicker, a little bit more nimble, and meet the needs of our district.
So that does then, these are big challenges that many districts are facing. And I also noticed that you talk about two schools that serve two distinctly different populations of students. And so I just wanted to bring that forward, as well as the question then. I know, Mindy, I'm sorry, I don't see your last name on there, but.
It's Andrus. I'm sorry, I don't know why it's not on there.
That you explained when mentors meet and all of those sorts of things. But I am thinking about, with so many potentially new teachers and temporary teachers, are there ways in which you're thinking about the ratio between experienced teachers and mentors and new teachers, and how everyone can work together?
Yeah, those are great questions, Ms. Sloan. Yes, we do have very distinct cities between Folsom and Rancho Cordova, very different needs, but then some very common needs. So as Mr. Wilson had said, we can be a little more nimble if we have our own induction program. As far as the ratios and the balancing, we do have our design team really works closely. Many of our mentors sit on the design team, and so we have very real-time feedback from them on how things can work and things can look. And we do have our mentor retreat at the beginning of each year where we talk about that. We talk about matches, and although I'm the one that makes the matches because everything needs to be held confidential as far as information I receive, I still use my design team, or we'll be using our design team to make those matches and look at those ratios. We have mentor buddies, so we have more experienced veteran mentors that work with our newer mentors to help them with their skill building, with supporting our mentors. We do have are setting up mentor forums that happen four times a year, plus an extra one that's kind of bonus if anyone wants to attend. But the mentor forums, we do work on our mentor skill building. We talk about current issues, hot topics, how we can provide just-in-time support, and then those provide support for each other. We support the mentors in that mechanism as well. So there is ongoing training and support for our mentors. But initially, like you were asking about the ratios, because we do have a lot of those challenges, we try to really work with building the skills of our mentors, but also looking, like I said, at the ratios, having mentor buddies, trying to pair those in such a way that it benefits our teachers and, of course, eventually the children the most. So I hope I answered your question with that. But these different programs we have in place that we're practicing, we think are helpful to solve some of those questions like you had raised.
Yeah, I think this is just, and I'm also really interested in, as you move forward and you grow, and all districts are dealing with, the districts who are dealing with these challenges and the ways they're thinking about innovative staffing models or team teaching or teams of teachers that, who work together in particular ways with different experience levels. I think I'm very interested to see how we're going to start solving these kinds of problems in our district. So thank you for your answer.
You're welcome.
Commissioners, any other questions or comments? Do not see any virtual hands. Okay. Without seeing any other virtual hands, this is an action item. And so we're going to vote on this. Do I have a motion to either grant provisional approval to Folsom Cordova Unified School District and set the provisional approval period to be 3 years, or deny provisional approval? Okay, I have a motion by Chair Sloan.
Yes, I move to grant approval.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Monica.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Cooney, I have a second to grant provisional approval. Recording secretary, or is there further discussion? Yes, Commissioner Klatt, thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm in support of the motion, but I have a concern though. And I should have prefaced too, I actually did my student teaching like in the early 90s at Mills Middle School in Folsom Cordova District and had a great experience there. So that was a long time ago, but the teachers I worked with were really wonderful and supportive at that time. I am concerned about the time issue with the mentors and the teachers. I think that even with the best intentions, sometimes teaching life can be really busy and trying to carve out that time sometimes. And I know teachers can be very creative in how they do that. And and I like the flexibility that they can be creative, but I have a concern about that. I think the relationship is so important between the mentor and the teacher. And when you're trying to carve out time, like those few minutes at lunch, or, it's the end of the day and you still have to prep and do work and contact parents and all these things after school. And sometimes people don't have daycare that they can get to school an hour early. And so I really am concerned about that. So while I'm in support, I would love to see perhaps some work on that to ensure, I don't know if it's teachers who are floating who can give release time, or especially as Chair Sloan pointed out, it seems like the need will be great and there will be many teachers in induction. So again, I'm in support, but I have a concern about the time. So I just wanted to make sure I shared that.
Am I able to address Ms. Klatt?
Executive Secretary, Madam Executive Director, are we allowed to? I can't hear you.
I was having a sidebar and did not hear the question. Please, can you?
The institution would like to respond to Commissioner Klatt's concern during this discussion period. Is that okay?
You may allow that.
Okay, go for it.
Thank you, Bonnie. I'm a Mustang as well. I taught for 9 years there and I was an AP there for 4, so near and dear to my heart. So yes, we absolutely are concerned about that. That's one of our big topics of discussion, is ensuring that we're providing that support, especially coming back from this past year and a half of distance learning and just, a lot of unrest in our world. So we do have a couple of extra mentors that we can send out to do extra mentoring or extra help, but we do have, of course, a process with a form where the hours are recorded so we can monitor that. And we encourage, of course, more hours than that. But I hear you. And I feel like that's a very big concern, that we're making sure that we give enough support and enough contact, more than enough. We do have a monthly district meeting where our mentors and teachers come together, and that is above in addition to the 40 hours. And it's a 2-hour meeting every month where they meet together, they sit together, they work together, they go to workshops together. So we do have those other layers as well, as in addition to those individual weekly conversations. But like I said, it is one of our concerns, and that is going to be one of our focuses, is the time, making sure we have time. The district has provided budget for release time for our mentors to go out to the schools. They have basically 2 full days or 4 half days per teacher, in addition to the every hour, 1 hour per week. So they have these extra blocks of time. So the district feels they're very supportive. Our board and our cabinet are very supportive of our teacher induction program that we have right now. And of course, moving forward, want to make sure that we're providing every and all support that's possible, and that includes time. So I appreciate that, Bonnie, because that's been, like I said, that's been our minds as well, to making sure that they feel just completely supported and basically enveloped with support and getting what they need just in time, but also on a regular basis. So we will make dispensations for that. So.
And thank you. That extra bits of information you shared were actually really helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Klatt, for continuing the discussion. Chair Sloan?
Yeah, and I do want to, this was also a little bit of what I was trying to get at. So I appreciate Commissioner Klatt for you bringing this up again. That just to, again, emphasize that also all of your, if you have intern teachers and temporary teachers, bringing them into the fold of mentorship, however you can develop those programs and communicate to us how you're doing that. And when we, next stage, when we're looking at program standards, sometimes in the context of responding to program standards, we can get more specific around the kinds of supports that candidates are going to receive. And that can help us understand the piece. But the other part to it is the extent to which you can also think outside the box as we rebuild schools after the pandemic. And again, teams of teachers that, supporting one another but how you develop your budget to support more teachers. They may not be teachers of record, but other personnel on your site supporting kids and teachers simultaneously will be something important that we'll be looking at.
Thank you both for the continued discussion on this issue. Anybody else want to add any comments or questions before we move to a vote? We have a motion to grant provisional approval to Folsom Cordova Unified School District and set the provisional approval period to 3 years. Any further discussion? And if not, we'll move to a vote. Okay, without seeing any, will the recording secretary call for the vote? Each member please respond with aye, nay, or abstain.
Jose Cardenas,
Aye.
C. Michael Cooney,
Aye.
Michael De La Torre,
Aye.
Marisol De La Torre Escobedo,
Aye.
Megan Gross,
Aye.
Johanna Harwick,
Aye.
Susan Aridia,
Aye.
Terry Jackson,
Aye.
Ronnie Klatt,
Aye.
Monica Martinez,
Aye.
David Simmons,
Aye.
Tina Sloan.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Boyd, for bringing this to us. And thank you, our representatives from Folsom Cordova Unified School District.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we will now move to item 4G, which is institutional approval stage 3 as well. Consideration of provisional approval for San Mateo Union High School District. This item is being presented by Poonan Betty. This is an action item. Miss Betty, will you please begin?
Absolutely. Good morning, commissioners. I will be taking up the second of the 3 IIA items this morning. So let's begin. Agenda item 4G presents the San Mateo Union High School District's responses to stage 3 of the initial institutional approval process for the Commission's consideration and possible provisional approval. The San Mateo Union High School District is proposing a teacher induction program. We have with us today 2 representatives from the district. They are, so on the screen here, Sadie Hopkins, who is the Professional Development and Induction Coordinator, and Kirk Black, who is the Deputy Superintendent of Human Resources and Student Services. They will be available to answer any programmatic questions you may have. On page 2 of the item, you will see the 5 stages of the initial institutional approval process chart, with the current stage, stage 3, highlighted. And as the chart notes, provisional approval means an institution is approved, but the institution cannot offer the proposed program until stage 4, in which the relevant program standards are reviewed to determine alignment. The proposed teacher induction program will then be brought before the Committee on Accreditation, who may approve or deny the program. On page 3 of the item, you will find the link to the San Mateo's district webpage that houses the submissions that contain the full responses to the preconditions and common standards. So the district has provided responses to the 2 initial program preconditions and teacher induction preconditions. Summaries of the responses to these preconditions can be found on pages 4 to 7 of this item. And review of the preconditions submission was completed by commission staff, and these preconditions have been found to be met. And as my colleague Clark mentioned earlier, an institution that is in stage 3 of the IIA process is also required to respond to common standards. So excerpts from San Mateo's responses to the common standards are found across pages 8 through 14 of this item. A team of BIR members reviewed, collaborated, and they came to a consensus on all the common standards. In conclusion, based on the findings of met for all relevant preconditions and aligned for all the common standards, staff would like to recommend provisional approval for the San Mateo Union High School District. It is recommended that the provisional approval be set for a period of 3 years. So in the 3rd year, a provisional site visit can occur and data can be collected. After the provisional site visit, a report will be completed and brought before the commission for consideration of full approval. And that is part of the 5th and final stage of the IIA process. So with that, staff is happy to answer any process questions. And again, we have Savi and Kirk from the San Mateo Union High School District available to answer any questions about the stage 3 submission or the proposed teacher induction program. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Betty. We will now open for public comment. If there are members of the public that like to give a presentation, remember, please notify the meeting moderator by clicking on the raise hand icon if participating through Zoom or pressing *9 if participating by phone. Recording secretary, are there any public comments?
There are no public comments on this item.
Okay, we'll give it a few seconds. The public comment period for this item is now closed. Do commissioners have questions or comments about this item? Okay, Commissioner Grenoff-Shire, and then Commissioner Brown, and then Commissioner Klatt.
Good morning, thank you. In looking at the item, I'm not finding, and maybe you can direct me, any detail regarding the number of hours that the mentors will work with teachers. On page 12, it says that the mentors will work regularly with the participating teachers. Can you provide a little bit more detail, please?
Yes, certainly. First, good morning and happy Juneteenth Day. And thank you for considering our provisional approval. My name is Kirk Black, Deputy Superintendent of HR and Student Services. Savvy Hopkins is with us, and she's our potential induction program coordinator, and she's going to provide the initial responses to your questions, if that's okay, and then I will follow up as needed. Savvy.
Good morning, Commission. So I'm Savvy Hopkins. Thank you so much. The question regarding the number of hours of support is should be in the full document of the common standards. It will also be clarified in the program standards. The 4 hours a month with an average of 1 hour a week is what we expect our mentors to provide for our induction teachers. I will make sure that that is called out and clear in the program standards. It's also in the teacher induction program handbook. It'll also be in our mentor handbook. I think that answers your question, but let me know if you need more information.
I don't know, just to circle back to a previous conversation regarding another induction program, there were some concerns raised by Commissioner Klatt regarding the making sure that those hours occur on a regular basis, and that I know you'll be keeping track of this, but just that is a concern that comes up oftentimes with new induction programs. So thank you.
Yeah, if I could follow up, I see that we did mention that on Common Standard 1 on the second page there, and all of our mentors will have release periods. We've had a long-standing program of about 8 years where we have veteran teachers, seasoned teachers as instructional coaches. So we have a pretty large bench of teachers who have experience and a lot of training for the New Teacher Center and others. other places regarding coaching. And we have a ratio that allows coaches to have a release period. And we don't have any coaches that don't have a release period unless they're a former coach and they're doing just one teacher because of a credential match, then they can get a stipend. But by and large, all of our mentors will have release periods, and that's one time they can meet. All of our teachers, including the coaches, also have a prep period and then a second release period called a PRP, Professional Responsibility Period. So they have those two periods, and then the coaches have a release period to meet throughout the day. And then every week we have embedded time for either PLCs or other professional developments.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Brown and then Commissioner Klatt.
Good morning to you both, and I'm a local. I'm a Peninsula resident, so my question is, and I hope that it's not uninformed, but Common Standard 2 is called Candidate Recruitment Support, and we just had a question around the support piece. But given that we live on the peninsula in the Bay Area, can you talk a little bit about your recruitment process and also what your need is? That's a big issue in the Bay Area for a lot of us in teacher education.
Thank you so much for that question. In terms of recruitment, I'm actually going to go ahead and pass this over to Dr. Black.
Sure, thank you. Yes, recruitment, similar to the last district, and what was said at the beginning by Ms. Martinez, I believe, there is a teacher shortage, and we experience that certainly in hard to fill subject areas. Our goal is to diversify our staff to better represent our students. We're doing, we're trying a number of things to attract teachers. First of all, our board has approved staff housing, and that is in the works. We're trying to find a location, near public transportation, and it will be, it'll be available to teachers on a 5-year basis with a very low interest rate and then there'll be also a program where they will be able to save money and then earn a very low interest rate for a house on their own within that 5 years. We also have reimbursements for moving expenses. We're working with our union, and we're pretty sure we're going to agree on signing bonuses or something to provide people, candidates who are moving out of the area into the, as you say, the peninsula. That's very expensive. We're looking right now at a $5,000 incentive if they move into the Bay Area to help them with first and last, for rent, or if they're doing the down payment on a house. We've hired a diversity, inclusion, and equity consultant, and we're working with them to try to spread out our recruitment efforts. We're focusing on counties with high percentages of diverse populations, and then credential programs with high percentages of diverse graduates. Along with our consultant has connections with the historical Black colleges and universities, so we're hoping that we can do a virtual tour to those schools, or at least some of those schools. So we're trying a lot of different things to try to recruit. Our main goal is diversity, but also to fill these hard to fill subject areas with these different initiatives that we're trying.
Thank you. I appreciate that. There are a lot of things we need to do, and San Mateo County Office of Ed can provide that. Thank you.
Great. Commissioner Klatt.
Oops, there we go. Thank you. And I had 2 questions, and I think Dr. Black already answered one of them. It was about the 0.2 FTE release time. And I think that sounds so lovely that the teachers, the coaches would have that prep period off, because sometimes a stipend is wonderful, but it doesn't make more hours in the day. So I really appreciate that about the program here. And I wanted to ask a couple of follow-up questions on that, because I'm really excited and it sounds really cool. And so I just wanted to hear a little bit more. In that same section, it talks about that new teachers are coached. And is that all new teachers into your district or just teachers who are in induction? And I saw also that every 4 years, all teachers are part of this coaching. And so it sounds to me like the induction program is really integrated into just a very robust system of supports. And so I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit more to that, because it just sounds really nice.
I'd be happy to talk about our new teacher support program. I think we recognized a number of years ago that retention in our district was super important. And one of the keys to making sure our teachers felt connected to the district and their school site cultures was to have a really intentional, holistic sort of newly hired teacher induction program. And so all teachers who are newly hired to the district, regardless of their preliminary or clear credential status, are automatically enrolled in this new teacher program, which includes an orientation and workshops throughout the year. And the idea is we want them to connect with one another because they're sort of a unique and special cohort. And we want them to begin to identify the systems of support they need to be successful. So we're really proud of that program. All newly hired teachers also have an instructional coach. If they are a teacher with a preliminary credential, the instructional coach then becomes their mentor, and the mentorship is the primary responsibility. If the teacher comes into our district with previous teaching experience, the instructional coach is there to sort of help connect them to site resources, acclimate them to the site, acclimate them to the school culture, and support them through their first 2 years of the evaluation process. And our evaluation process is really centered on teacher professional growth, which is why we have our teachers working on SMART goals and areas of self-identified need. So yeah, we're really proud of the program, and it's been well received by our participants. I don't know if I can answer anything further about that, or if Dr. Black has anything he wants to add.
Just the every 4 years is part of that every teacher goes through our program, and every 4 years they either receive an instructional coach to help them through the process, or they do a professional growth plan. The majority receive coaches, but some teachers are very busy. They're already doing leadership roles. They're trying to get another credential, and therefore we provide them with this professional growth plan, and they can take that avenue. But most people really value the, as most people do in general, having a coach, and we're very fortunate that we can provide that. And, it wasn't our idea. Of course, we've had a lot of training by West Ed and the New Teacher Center, and they helped us design what we're providing now. And we've had it as a pilot program for 7 or 8 years, and because we kept tinkering with it. But now the union and the district has agreed to put this in the contract. So this will be solidified. And also the language also has induction language in there, if we get approved. If not, we'll have to take it out. But so now it's all solidified in our CBA. So this will be a requirement going forward, and one that we all are fortunate, proud of, but also feel very fortunate that we're able to have and provide.
Thank you for sharing. That's wonderful.
Great. Any other questions or comments by the commissioners? Okay. This is an action item.
Right. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I couldn't find the.
Oh, I wasn't sure if you were reaching or.
Raise your hand. Yeah, no. I'm reaching. Sorry. I just have one follow-up question. And that was about the professional responsibility period. So financing that is not easy, I'm assuming. Could you speak a little bit about that? I mean, because that's part of a release time when you look at the budgets for schools and, and teacher release time. So could you just speak to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, yes, certainly. And that it does sound expensive, doesn't it? What the origin of that is we moved from a 6-period schedule to a 7-period schedule way back, maybe 2005 or 2007. And teachers used to teach 5 of the 6 periods. Now they teach 5 of the 7. Instructional minutes were decreased in these periods. And a lot of high schools and schools in general went from 6 to 7 periods. So, but the teachers continued to only teach 5. They didn't, teach 6 of 7. So therefore they had a 2nd period. And we agreed with our association not to make it a prep, because a prep has it's solely dedicated to the teacher prepping for their classes. And they were going to have the same amount of classes, so we felt they could have the same prep, but they, 2 preps they probably, didn't need. And instead we have that period that's what we call professional responsibility period, where general ed teachers will go to IEPs. They may help with assessments. Educational specialists may do academic assessments of their students. We may have course-alike teachers meet during those and collaborate during those periods. We have schools with smaller learning communities, and they collaborate in their different communities. So that professional responsibility period covers a lot of things. Also training, and teachers can do their mandatory training during that time. So that's kind of open for what we expect teachers to do in regard to their profession and being qualified. But it really didn't cost more money because we just moved from the 6 to the 7 periods for the students, and the teachers just stayed at 5.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Other questions? Okay. Don't want to move too fast this time. Okay, so this is an action item. Appreciate the conversation. And do I have a motion to either grant provisional approval to San Mateo Union High School District and set the provisional approval period to be 3 years, or deny provisional approval?
So I move approval to grant San Mateo the provisional approval by the commission.
Right, thank you. In the 3 years. And I saw that Commissioner De La Torre, you were seconding it. So I have a motion and we have a second. And so we will, any other discussion? Okay. Will the recording secretary call for the vote? Each member, please respond with aye, nay, or abstain.
Jose Cardenas,
Aye.
C. Michael Cooney,
Aye.
Marco De La Torre,
Aye.
Marisol De La Torre Escobedo,
Aye.
Megan Gross,
Aye.
Johanna Harwick,
Aye.
Susan Heredia,
Aye.
Perry Jackson,
Aye.
Bonnie Clark,
Aye.
Monica Martinez,
Aye.
David Simmons,
Aye.
Tina Sloan.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great. Okay, thank you, Miss Betty. And most of all, thank you, Dr. Black and Ms. Hopkins, for your time and learning about some of your innovative strategies. Dr. Black, did you have a final comment?
No, I was just saying our pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thank you for the time and the really in-depth answers you gave that help us understand more about your district and what you guys are doing. Thank you, Ms. Hopkins, as well. And we'll move on to our next item of 4-H. Okay. This next item 4-H, institutional approval stage 3 as well. Consideration of provisional approval for Huntington Beach Union High School District. This item is being presented by Michelle Williams-George. This is an action item. Ms. Williams-George, will you please begin?
Yes, thank you. So good morning, Commissioners and Executive Director Sandy. Item 4-H is the last of this morning's IIA Stage 3 institutions. And this agenda item presents the Huntington Beach Union High School District's responses to Stage 3, the institutional approval process for the Commission's consideration and possible provisional approval. As stated in the agenda item, Huntington Beach Union High School District is proposing a teacher induction program. We have 2 district representatives here today to answer programmatic and institutional questions. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Kendra Rosales, Induction Coordinator and Lead Program Developer, and Dr. Rocky Murray, Executive Director of Curriculum, Instruction, and Categorical Programs, who oversees the program development. And I do want to acknowledge Chris Long, who is unable to be with us today, but is an integral part of the program development. So before addressing the agenda item information, I'd like to review the context of this particular institution. You may remember from the institution's Stage 2 eligibility requirements submission that the district has been a collaborative partner in a teacher induction consortium since 2004. They were originally part of the West Orange County Beginning Teacher Support and Assessment, WITSA, consortium, With the introduction of the new induction standards in 2017-18, they transitioned to Riverside County Office of Education's new teacher induction program because the district felt this program better aligned with their own mission and vision, particularly regarding the cycle of inquiry. As you will have read in the initial program precondition number 1, Huntington Beach Union High School District decided to develop its own teacher induction program because of financial logistics and the belief that a district differentiated induction program would not only increase new teacher retention, but would also provide a focus on the culture and setting of the individual schools in the district, as well as the uniqueness of the students in those schools. So returning to the agenda item, on page 2, you will find IIA Stage 3 highlighted, showing where this institution stands in the 5 stages of the IIA process, having had eligibility requirements recently approved in April of this year. As my colleagues have identified, Stage 3 focuses on the institution's capacity to comply with policy, statute, and regulations, as well as provide an institutional infrastructure which supports the proposed program. Provisional approval in Stage 3 means an institution is approved but cannot offer the proposed programs until the completion of Stage 4, wherein relevant program standards are determined to be aligned and brought before the Committee on Accreditation, who may then approve or deny the program. And we've talked a little bit about Stage 4 with the other institutions. The link to the institution's website can be found on page 3 of this item. This web page houses all the previous and current submission and contains the full responses to Huntington Beach Union High School District's Stage 3 preconditions and common standards. Summaries of the institution's responses to the initial program preconditions, as well as the teacher induction preconditions, can be found on pages 4 through 8. Commission staff reviewed these preconditions and found them all to be met. Summaries of Huntington Beach Unified High School District's responses to the common standards can be found on pages 9 through 15. A team of BAR members reviewed, collaborated, and came to consensus that all common standards are aligned. Based on the findings of met for all relevant preconditions and aligned for all common standards, staff recommends provisional approval for Huntington Beach Union High School District for a period of 3 years. This timeframe will allow the institution to navigate the remaining stages of the IIA process. This includes responding to program standards in Stage 4, and then collecting program data, and in 2024, hosting a provisional site visit for Stage 5. After that provisional visit, staff will bring a complete report before the Commission for consideration of full approval, thereby completing all the steps of the IIA process. Staff is happy to answer any process questions, and Ms. Rosales and Dr. Murray are here to answer any questions regarding their Stage 3 submission or proposed teacher induction program. Thank you for your attention to this item.
Thank you, Ms. Williams-George. We'll now open for public comment. If there are members of the public that'd like to give a presentation, please notify the meeting moderator by clicking on the raise hand icon. If participating through phone, press *9. Recording secretary, are there any public comments?
We do not have any public comments at this time.
Okay, thank you for that. The public comment period for this item is now closed. Do commissioners have questions or comments on this item? I love it. Okay, Commissioner Klatt.
I'm going to sound like a broken record here, I think.
That is quite okay.
So in looking through, so good morning, first of all, and welcome. In looking through the materials, I found a lot of information about the responsibilities of the mentors and the logging. I think the Google Forms for logging looks streamlined and wonderful. And I'm going to ask, I don't know if you were listening to the prior 2 items, but I'm going to ask the same question. How will the hours, the meetings between the mentors and the teachers participating in induction, when will that happen?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Klatt. I had a feeling it might be coming. So first of all, I want to address that our union contract says that we as teachers work from 7:30 to 3:30 daily, and all of our teachers are provided with a release time, regardless if they're a coach or not. Most teachers' days are somewhere from like an 8 to 2:30. So there's definitely time before school and after school within contract hours. Above and beyond that, though, at the very start, once a candidate and coach are matched, they set a specific day and time each week that they are to meet. And the coach is compensated with a monthly stipend for making sure that they are meeting at least an hour each week. For those of us that have been in induction a while, we know that it generally is more hours in the beginning of the year. And then, towards certain grading periods and, just the typical ebb and flow of what happens in our teachers' daily lives. Furthermore, though, with that, even though there's that set day and time, one of the beautiful parts about the pandemic was how amazing it is to be able to easily hop on. If, let's say, our coaches and candidates aren't at the same site, being able to use technology in the form of Zoom or Meet and be like, okay, the student put this on their paper. What do I do about it? So being able to achieve those just-in-time supports regardless of distance, we do try to pair them same subject, same site as much as possible. In addition to that, I, as induction coordinator, am fully released so that if a candidate were in need of more support, I can go cover the coach's classroom. So that way the coach can be there to continue to foster that relationship to help their candidate. We also do build into the budget on top of the stipend release time for our coaches. That is both for observations to do with the candidate. Before we ever have our coaches observe our candidates, we actually have them go together as a pair to observe other veteran teachers. So that way they kind of get a sense of what's to be expected and how it is a non-evaluative observation. It is for the growth of the candidate. So we have that release time built in as well. If a candidate was in need of even more support than what those opportunities already provide, we also, most of our sites within our district also have a MTSS, so multi-tiered systems of support, TOSA, that's released a period. There are also department coordinators for every subject area on the site. And so if we needed to have them offer support, and then of course our site administrators, they are more than willing to if ever needed to cover a class to be able to support the new teachers. So although we are not as fortunate as the previous district to be able to fully release a full extra period for all of our coaches, we do feel that we have enough built in that allows the coach to truly create that mentoring relationship with their candidate.
Thank you. I really appreciate all the layers of support that you were able to explain. So that's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Klatt, we appreciate the question for each of our candidates. So thank you very much. Let's see, my screen's moving around, but I did see a virtual hand go up, I thought. Other questions? Oh yeah, Commissioner Grano-Shire and then Commissioner De La Torre.
I don't have a question. I just want to comment on how diversity, equitable educational experiences, and culturally responsive practices seem threaded throughout this application, and I really appreciate that. I also appreciate, at least how it's written, your intent to give your candidates opportunities to reflect on their practices as it relates to DEI. So good for you. Thank you. We'll look forward to seeing how that goes.
Thank you very much for that praise.
So we will go with Commissioner Michael De La Torre, and then we'll go with Commissioner De La Torre, the added name.
Thank you. Good morning. I did hear that you had the release time for the mentors. Is there also the paid release time for the participant teachers?
That's a wonderful follow-up, Commissioner De La Torre. Yes, we do have built into the budget so that the candidate has the opportunity. As I mentioned before, the very first observation is where the candidate and the coach go together. They get to pick. We actually have a full list. It's still developing, but we have a full list of teachers across subject areas and across sites that have already, the all call went out and they've already said, yes, please have a new teacher contact me and set up observations. So within the budget, we have allocated for that candidate to be able to take a release time. And I have to say that our human resources, our business services, and our educational services, like I think of this program as like the nursery at a hospital with newborns. Like everyone gets really excited about it and wants to support and do whatever possible to make sure that these new teachers have what they need. So I feel very confident that if a candidate were to need more than what was in the budget, we would find a creative solution to make sure that they had that release time. Also, we do encourage another part of our program, although this is going to go against their personal time, we really emphasize to all of our teachers the importance of work-life balance. And we tell our new teachers up front, some of them are really hesitant to take, we get 12 personal days or 8 personal days, 12 sick days total. So total of 12 days total. And we encourage our candidates, please take that day and make sure that I know in my first few years, I would take a day to grade just because it helped me feel better. So we encourage our candidates to do the same to make sure that they're taking care of them and to understand that this is a career that is more like a marathon than a sprint.
Thank you. We're going to go to Commissioner De La Torre Escobedo, and then we'll go to Commissioner Heredia.
So I was going to give the same feedback that Commissioner Grano-Shire just mentioned in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I'm wondering if you can go into more depth in that in terms of retaining teachers and your partnership with UC Irvine and what you're doing there.
Dr. Murray, you want me to start or you want to jump in?
Can you clarify a little bit more on the retaining teachers part?
Yeah, so you say here, just in terms of you taking great pride in retaining your teachers, and you're seeking approval from the Board of Trustees to partner with UC Irvine's Diversity, Inclusion, and Racial Healing Ambassador Program. So if you can go into more depth in terms of what that will do and what that looks like now.
Yeah, that partnership just started for us. They're going to kick us off in August with a full 700 teacher and staff. Actually, our 2,000 staff members are all going to join that training in August. And then they're going to work with us one time a month on each of our campuses for an hour. And then we have another 2-hour session in January, which will continue through the end of the school year. And they're going to have, they have through this program, they have different themes that will work through. They have a set program, but we're also going to take our staff feedback, and UCI is willing to adjust the program based on our individual needs at our school sites because they are different. So that just happened for us for next year. That the DEI work is started on our campuses through an offshoot of MTSS, and so the DEI work is really what has pushed us to this level now. So we're taking that feedback, from our students, even as far as going forward. So the UCI piece, they're going to also partner with OCDE, I believe, probably after this school year. I think they have an intent to do that, but we were able to get on the front end of it. So as far as the teacher retention piece, I don't think they're really connected as far as the HR side of the house of what we do, but for our staff and providing this training. So we're connecting with our students on a deeper level and recognizing every student name, face, story, that sort of theme. That's going to be the work with Deer Hawk.
Great, thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you both. Commissioner Heredia?
Yes, I just had a quick question about the TOSAs, which was another part of your layer for support. Do you have TOSAs assigned to each school, or are they district TOSAs? So the district TOSAs are then, sort of sent out to the school site? Or is there a TOSA at each school site that offers the intern support?
We have lots of layers. So thank you for that question. And I know it can sometimes be hard to translate that into written form, at least for me, the math teacher. I tried my hardest. So one of the ways, so first of all, a couple of things. The MTSS TOSAs that I spoke of, those are usually a single period release, and it is a teacher at that given site. So the site picks the person that they feel is going to be able to best work with their site's teacher. So it is a 1 period release. In addition, we also have fully released TOSAs in various subject areas. So for example, I, as new teacher induction TOSA or coordinator, that'll what it be next year. We have our ed tech coordinator. We also have a couple of different positions within special ed and CTE that are fully released. So for example, if like a candidate was showing that they needed extra support with organizing subject matter, I can go to any one of those fully released TOSAs and they would help from the district level. In addition, at the district level, we also have a unique position to our district called a curriculum facilitator. These curriculum facilitators are current classroom teachers that have anywhere from 1 to 3 releases. And those are subject specific. So again, it is all hands on deck regarding induction. So depending upon the candidate specific need, we also have within the curriculum facilitators, we have a facilitator that's dedicated to English language learners. As I mentioned, we have a couple different ones dedicated to specific special ed. We have one for literacy. So depending upon what the need of the candidate is, I feel like we have a person that is able to come truly support that candidate and help with their growth.
So how many TOSAs do you have that are fully released?
Specific for this program, there is me, the induction coordinator, but then do you mean like people I could go to for support district?
Yeah.
Ooh, one.
I mean, are there like 8 or 10 district-wide?
I would say that there's between us that are fully released, I'm going to say 6 to 7 off the top of my head.
Okay.
And remember, I always am, when I hear of someone saying they want to go from 20,000 to 40,000, I'm like, oh, that's really big compared to us. But we're also not super small. We're about 15,000 for our student population. So
thank you.
You're welcome.
The district has traditionally used the single period releases or 2 or 3 for those subject specific, just because they are the content curriculum expert for that area versus releasing 3 people and having them cover, split social science, English, PE, and or so forth. So that's just been the direction we've taken.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Other commissioners, any other questions? And we'll move to action item. Okay, I don't see any, so unmute if I missed you. This is an action item. So we need a motion to either grant provisional approval to Huntington Beach Union High School District and set the provisional period to be 3 years, or deny provisional approval. Do I have a motion? Okay, Commissioner Klatt makes a motion to approve. Do I have a second? I'm assuming Commissioner Klatt, it was to approve. Yes, okay, thank you. Do I have a second? Okay, Commissioner Jackson. Okay, any further discussion? Will the recording secretary call for the vote? Each member, please respond with aye, nay, or abstain.
Jose Cardenas.
Aye.
C. Michael Cooney.
Aye.
Michael Delatorre.
Aye.
Marisol Delatorre Escobedo.
Aye.
Megan Gross.
Aye.
Johanna Howitt.
Aye.
Susan Aridia.
Aye.
Terry Jackson.
Aye.
Bonnie Klatt.
Aye.
Monica Martinez.
Aye.
David Simmons.
Aye.
Tina Sloan.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Williams-George. Thank you, Ms. Rosales and Dr. Murray. And thank you to the CTC staff for keeping us on schedule with our speakers this morning. This concludes our 3 initial institutional approval action items, and we are now going to move to item 4C. I'm just going to do a real quick check-in. I thought we could get through 4C before we do a break. So maybe thumbs up if that's okay, that we keep moving with 4C, and then we can take a break after this. All right, fantastic. Okay. 4C, item 4C is revising the passing score standard for the California Administrator Performance Assessment. This item is being presented by Gay Roby, Amy Riesling, and Heather Klesch. For those who want to make a public comment, you can raise your hand during the presentation, and that way we'll have a sense of how many public comments we have. They will be limited to 2 minutes. This is an action item. Ms. Riesling, will you please begin?
Yes, good morning, Commissioners. I'm joined this morning by 2 of my colleagues for the presentation of this item, Gay Roby, as well as Heather Klesch, Vice President with Evaluation Systems Group of Pearson. So to get this item started, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Gay. So we're going to give Gay a second to come back online. But in the meantime, I'll just go ahead and give you the overview for this item. So in the introduction section, you can see that the item in front of us this morning provides foundational information about the standard setting process for commission-developed examinations and assessments, and also a recommendation for adopting a new passing score standard for the California Administrator Performance Assessment. So I'm going to check in. Is Gay back with us?
Don't see him on this, but I welcome
That's
that
okay.
liaison.
We'll just, we can just move forward. That's fine. And if Gay comes back online, you'll just let me know and I can turn it back to her. Is that all right? All right. So we wanted to provide a little background for you in this item. So I want to just start by explaining that the preliminary administrative services credential programs in partnership with the commission and appointed design team of 20 members and in the evaluation systems group of Pearson have been engaged in the development and implementation of the assessment for the past 6 years. Hard to believe, really. We started in 2015 and here we are in 2021. In June of 2019, a standard-setting panel comprised of educators was convened to conduct the review of the Cal APA candidate score data from the first year of operations and recommend a passing standard to the Commission for the 1920 operational administration year, which was the first year. The membership of the design team is provided for you in Appendix A. And the standard setting panel that was convened, a whole different group of California educators, is provided for you in Appendix B. The Commission began discussing the development of this performance assessment for administrative services credential candidates in September of 2012. And the idea to have an assessment was approved in 2015 and funded through the State Budget Act, and development work began. To ensure the scoring reliability, the APA is centrally managed and scored by calibrated assessors to ensure the detailed and analytic feedback is provided to candidates and programs. All of the 3 administrative cycles are based on measuring the California Administrator Performance Expectations, or CAPE. And the data recovered from these assessments aligns with the needs of the Commission's Accreditation Data System, or ADS, providing an outcomes-based set of quality indicators to help guide review of administrator prep programs as we move forward in time. After a 2-year development by the team, PASC programs, PASC standing for Preliminary Administrative Services Credential Programs, were provided a gradual implementation process for this new assessment and for their candidates. After a pilot year and a field test year, so 2 full years of development and trial, candidates were offered a consequential scoring year. That was the third year of experiences with this assessment, all funded by the commission. And candidates were required to complete the APA that year. It was non-consequential, but were not required to meet a passing standard. In anticipation, the commission established an initial passing score in August of 2019. And now, 2 years later, we're here today to put data in front of you for your consideration. As we move forward in time, we will continue to look at that data, and commission staff will continue to monitor that data and update the commission at future meetings, providing the opportunity for the commission to consider adopting the initial recommendation made by that panel setting group in 2019. So we're going in this item to move forward and think about, given the data, what we might do 1 year from now, and then what we might do 2 years from now as we come into the year of 2023. So just a quick overview of what the APA requires of its candidates. There are 3 leadership cycles. The first leadership cycle focuses on analyzing data to inform school improvement and promote equity. In this cycle, candidates engage in an equity study and think about an implementation plan based on that equity gap analysis that they conduct, that they would implement at a school site, and they gather stakeholder feedback. The second cycle, cycle 2, is about facilitating communities of practice. This cycle focuses on facilitating collaborative professional learning within a community of practice for the purpose of improving teaching and student learning or well-being, both important components of a student's experience at school. Within the cycle of investigate, plan, act, and reflect, candidates begin by identifying a group of educators to work through and identify collaboratively a problem of practice. They then select together an evidence-based strategy and implement that strategy. Through that implementation process, they begin to gather early feedback from the implementation of that practice, and those early implementation findings are discussed through prompts that guide and expect the candidate to respond to how that went. In addition, they gather information about how they're doing as a facilitator with that learning group. The third instructional cycle is about supporting teacher growth, and preliminary candidates focus on coaching an individual teacher to strengthen teaching practices and improve, again, student learning and or well-being. It's your choice. Within that same set of 4 steps, investigate, plan, act, and reflect, the candidates familiarize themselves and learn about how to coach and observe teaching practice at a school site. They identify that volunteer teacher that they work with and conduct that full coaching cycle. They engage in a pre-observation meeting. They actually go and observe the instruction, collect observation data, and have a post-observation meeting where they look at data together from the observation and from student work. Throughout this leadership cycle, candidates reflect on their strengths and areas for professional growth and how they are learning to be an instructional coach and an equity-minded leader. So those are the 3 cycles. Now, each of these cycles has a set of what we call analytic rubrics. Each rubric has 5 levels and a 5-point scale. Cycle 1 has 8 rubrics. Cycles 2 and 3 each have 7. So as a candidate works through these 3 cycles and completes and submits their evidence and their evidence is scored, they're getting quite a bit of formative feedback. They conduct a cycle, submit it to be scored, it's scored, the score reports come back to the teacher, to the leader candidate, to the program, and to the commission, and they move through those 3 cycles each time upon completion, receiving that analytic feedback so they can share that with a coach and get even more support. The 5 levels of the rubric provide qualitative descriptions while at the same time being summative, because you must meet passing scores for each of the cycle. In the 5-level cycle, it's important to note that each rubric has what we call an essential question. That essential question lays out what we're measuring, and the expectations of the essential question are at the level 3 point on the rubric. So performance, as evidence would demonstrate, starts at level 3. A level 2 performance, just quickly, is a candidate who is typically limited in their response, inconsistent in their response, not quite clear, but attempting to meet the expectations of the rubric. A level 1 response, the lowest response, is a response that doesn't marshal enough evidence in light of the evidence required. And moving up from a level 3 to get to a level 4, you must demonstrate all of level 3 and then in addition the constructs of level 4. To get to a 5, again, all of level 3, all of level 4, and all of level 5. Level 5 performance being truly outstanding performance beyond really the expectations of that essential question and the constructs being measured at the level 3. So just setting that stage, then if each candidate were to perform at the level 3 on each rubric, across those 3 rubrics, for example, in cycle 1, if they were at a level 3 across all 8 rubrics, they would have 24 score points. For the next cycle, they would have 21, and the next 21, because each of those cycles has 7 rubrics. So given that we have the 3 cycles and we have all the analytic rubrics, let's move on and talk about that first operational non-consequential year. And that was the year for which we conducted the standard setting study. That was 2018-19. So following the pilot test, so in our development of these assessments, we go through a 2-year cycle. In the first year, we do a pilot test. We invite all programs to join us for that experience so they can learn and help start supporting their faculty in moving through the process. And then we follow that year of pilot study. Once we have the data and we iterate, we then move into a field test study, again collecting data, again inviting all programs to come alongside and learn about this performance assessment. At that point in time, it was felt that we really needed a longer sort of gestation period for this assessment, and so we were able to move to a full non-consequential year. So in the 3rd year, all candidates and all programs now were involved, had to complete all 3 cycles, but did not have to meet a passing standard. In order to be considered as a non-consequential candidate, the candidate needed to be enrolled in the program between June 1st of 2018 through May 31st of 2019, so that full year. And our programs are amazingly diverse and supportive and begin their programs, we come to find out, every single month of the year. So it was a little bit of an interesting situation for us to set that year, but we did it from June 1st, 2018 through May 31st of 2019. So the non-consequential candidates were required to complete, as I said, all 3 cycles, and we gave them until December 31st of 2020, knowing that sometimes candidates just need more time and more support. So they could be non-consequential once they began, all the way up through December 31st of 2020. So during that first operational non-consequential year, candidates didn't have to meet that passing standard, as I said, but then at the end of completion, they could be recommended for that admin services credential, or, of course, remember the certificate of eligibility if they don't have a job in place. So for purposes of the June 2019 standard setting study, all complete and scored submissions through June 6th were included in the data analysis and preparation for the standard setting process. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over, I think, to my other colleague, Heather Klesch. Heather, are you on the line with us?
I am on the line, Amy.
Awesome. Well, welcome to our meeting, Heather, and thank you for being with us. If you would like to continue with the item.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amy, and good morning, commissioners. I am just going to provide a brief overview of the standard setting activity that was conducted. It was a 2-day meeting that we met in June of 2019 that involved some pre-work. I came in front of you following that to discuss those outcomes. The full description of that meeting is found in Appendix C of your item. So as a recap, standard setting is the term that we use in the assessment industry to describe the process of establishing a passing standard or a minimum passing score for an assessment. And in this case, what we did was we met with a panel of educators, which you have that listing, in order to get their recommendations on the minimum performance standard for each of the cycles that Amy described for you. It was an iterative process that we led them through a number of steps and activities throughout the 2 days. And this activity then resulted in recommended cut scores for each of the 3 cycles from this expert panel. The expert panel throughout the 2 days utilized a framework that's described in the item on page 4, but the idea being that within these two key questions, this key question and framing, these experts will be making a recommended passing score judgment. And the question that we asked them to consider was to think about an administrator candidate who is just at the level of knowledge and skills required to perform effectively the job of a new administrator in California public schools. And the question to the panelists individually was what score, which was the sum of all of the rubrics, as Amy described within each cycle, represents the level of performance that would be achieved by this individual. And so we used that question as a framework throughout the 2 days to ensure that we were all grounded in a similar definition, even though experiences and backgrounds may vary in terms of the experience that folks were bringing to that judgment, but the definition and how this standard would be applied would be consistent. Through a facilitated process, the panelists were presented with descriptive data on the Cal APA. As Amy described, that data included all candidates' complete and scored submissions, both consequential and non-consequential, any scored submissions that we had in as of that date. And from that process, each panelist recommended an initial passing score. That initial passing score, then, we took that information and we held a facilitated discussion, and each of the panelists could see their fellow panelists' initial recommendations. So through discussion, then the panelists were presented with what we call impact data, which reflected the number and the percent of candidates who would theoretically pass at each of their potential recommended cut scores, so that we could show them, if you had a cut score at this level, here's what the impact would be to the field. And those modeled pass rates were provided by gender, by ethnicity, by placement setting, in terms of the setting of the rural, suburban, urban, as well as candidate primary language. And a final passing score was then ultimately recommended by each panelist, utilizing that information that had been brought to them. You'll see on page 5 of the agenda item the 3 recommended passing standards, one for each of the leadership cycles. So cycle 1, which has 8 rubrics, final cut score of 19 was the panel recommended median. Cycle 2, which has 1 fewer rubric, 7 rubrics, had a cut score of 17 points recommended, as well as cycle 3 with 17 points. We do tend to use the median as it is less susceptible to being influenced by outlying ratings. A mean will be pulled by somebody who is extremely high or extremely low on their judgments. So we presented all of the ratings to the panelists, but ultimately we bring to you the recommended median for this purpose. On page 5 at the bottom, table 1, this shows the panel recommendation. This shows the data that the panel had in front of them in terms of mean candidate performance. So this was from 2018, 2019. And we wanted to present this in context with the panelists' original recommendations, so you could see the actual performance that was captured by candidates in terms of each cycle. So cycle 1 had a mean score of 23.1, cycle 2 at 19.2, cycle 3 at 20.1, and you can see the relative number of candidates for each of those cycles, the standard deviation, and the median. And the panelists' recommended cut scores are below all of those mean performances or medians. So it was not an unreasonable recommendation given candidate performance and where the panel wound up falling out in terms of their recommendation. So finally, I'll just conclude with on page 6, you'll see that a recap. We brought to you in August the recommended passing scores from the panel, and there was a discussion around applying a statistical adjustment, the standard error of measurement, for those recommended passing scores after having reviewed all of the subgroup performance and impact to the field. And so the outcome of that August 2019 commission meeting was that a standard error of measurement adjustment of 1.5 was applied to each of the cycles, which wound up resulting in cut scores of 14 for cycle 1 and 12 for cycle 2 and 3 each. And that also was couched in terms of support for programs, as this was, even though it was 2 or 3 years, as Amy said at the time, it was a relatively new assessment out in the field, and we wanted to support programs that were in early stages in terms of their faculty, their instructors, their support to candidates and field supervisors in the field. And so the intention at that time, as was discussed, was to review and revisit the scores. And we have done that here in terms of the current status of the scores. Amy?
Thank you, Heather. So as we move on through the item, at the bottom of page 6 is another important table. Candidate data has been continually monitored by the Commission and evaluation systems over the past several years. And in examining the 2020-2021 year, candidate passing data for scored submissions is high for the 3 cycles, with cycle 1 14 points at approximately 99% of our candidates passing, for cycle 2 at 12 points with 100% of our candidates passing, and cycle 3 at 12 points with 100% of our candidates passing. And so in the table there, table 2, you can see that there is even a slight increase in candidate performance since 2019. Again, looking at that mean data and the median. So we could just stick with the median data perhaps, and you can see there in the table that for cycle 1, total of 40 points, the median score for our candidates was 23. For cycle 2, the median score was 19, and for cycle 3, the median score was 21. We additionally went on and have been monitoring subgroup analysis by ethnicity. This is also very positive data, with no subgroups performing at significantly lower rates than any other group. The majority of candidates have been able to pass 3 cycles of the Cal APA at the entry-level passing standards adopted by the Commission in 2019. Table 3 provides a summary of percentage of passage rates at current passing standards through May of 2021, and we are representing the data by ethnicity in this table. You can see that our N was 1,047 candidates. For those not identifying or choosing not to respond to the ethnicity question, 49 passed at 100%. The total passage for the 1,047 candidates was 99%. These, again, I want to remind you, are for the candidates that completed and submitted evidence, complete evidence for cycle 1, cycle 2, and cycle 3. So this data is representing candidates who completed all 3 cycles. Moving on then, when we look at our ethnicity data, for Black candidates, 97% of the 72 passed. Asian, of the 58, 98% passed. Southeast Asian, 42, 100% passed. Pacific Islanders, we had 5 candidates, 100% passed. For our Hispanic candidates, our largest, nope, not quite. Second largest number, 313 Hispanic candidates, 99% passed. All 3 cycles. For Native American, of which we had 4, 100% passed. For the white candidates, 475 took the 3 assessments, 99% passed. And then 29 other, 100% passed. So these, in fact, are high passing rates for each cycle, and this provides the opportunity for commissioners, for you all to reconsider the panel's original passing standard recommendation, remembering that original recommendation was for cycle 1, 19 points, cycles 2 and 3, 17 points. The table below, table 4, shows modeled pass rates when applying a 2-year planned increase to the increasing current passing score in order to arrive at the standard setting team's passing scores, again, of 1917 and 17 2 years ago. The phased approach that we discuss in this item would allow for an immediate step halfway to the current cuts, between the current cut scores. Remember, right now a candidate needs to get 14 points on cycle 1, 12 on cycle 2, and 12 on cycle 3. And what we're proposing in the table below is that we take a step forward and move not to the full recommendation of 19, 17, and 17, but to a midway recommendation of, in Table 4, you can see, of 16 points for Cycle 1, 14 for Cycle 2, and 14 for Cycle 3. And if that were the case, you can see in the table then what would happen to our passing rates. So again, for that 1,047 candidates, if you can look between tables 3 and 4, you can see what would happen. So we had 99% passing for all candidates. We would drop slightly to 97% passing, and so on across the data. So for NA, it would be from 100% to 98%. For Black candidates, 97%, holding steady at 97% if we were to raise by 2 points. For the Asian candidates, a small decrease from 98% to 95%. For Southeast Asians, 100% to 98%. For Pacific Islanders, they would stay the same, 100% to 100% if we raised the scores by 2 points. For our Hispanic candidates, again, a slight decrease from 99% to 96% with the current data. Native Americans remain at 100%. White, 99%, slight drop to 96% for those 475 candidates, and then 100% and 100% passing for the final 29. So all that being said, in the 2021 passing score data, including that review of the subgroup analysis by ethnicity, we're not really at a point in time where we would support adjusting the passing standard to the full recommendation made in 2019 by the panel. But we are putting the data in front of you for your consideration about whether or not it's time to take that half step and increase the scores slightly. We believe that programs are still deeply developing their knowledge and ability to fully support all candidates as they engage in the 3 cycles. And of course, COVID presented any number of new challenges to all of us in education, but particularly to our programs as they were assisting new candidates coming in to becoming administrative services credential holders. And of course, in this work of performance assessment, you need to be working with at an actual school site and with actual educators, students, and their families and guardians. So that presented quite a number of challenges, and we provided some flexibilities around that. And many educators moved to online platforms, as you know. Some worked in hybrid situations. So given the challenges of COVID and thinking about where we are in development, about 4 years, we're beginning our operational 4th year in the fall, we felt that only a half step is what we would put in front of you. So to take the half step towards reaching the panel recommended passing standards from 2 years ago, Commission staff proposed that approximately a 0.75 SEM be applied, decreasing us from that 1.5 SEM that was set. So again, by incrementally increasing the passing standards over a 2-year time period towards that panel's recommendation from 2 years ago, this would give programs and candidates and faculty and those who supervise and support our administrators in the field another year really of development and time to truly embed this assessment in the work. Commission staff and, of course, evaluation system will continue to monitor and analyze passing score data as we come into the 2021-22. We're all feeling, I think, eager and ready to be back in school settings and back on campuses, and we're hoping that that's going to happen. And then we will continue to conduct analysis of the pass rate data as we come into 22 and 23. Candidates who've already passed 1 or 2 of the cycles currently would retain their passing status. Only cycles that have not yet been completed as of January 1st, 2022 would be held to the revised passing standard if you were to determine to revise the passing standard. So following the Commission's approach for exams, any revision to the passing standard would be implemented moving forward only and will not be applied retroactively. Commission staff and evaluation systems will revisit submission deadlines to make sure that candidates have all opportunities to submit under the current passing standards, giving them as much as an opportunity to complete if they're already in the middle of their 3 cycles. PASC programs will have the opportunity to continue developing their capacity to embed into the course of study and clinical practice all these expectations for our candidates as we continue to work together to move forward to prepare quality administrators for our schools in California. We will continue as a commission staff and with our technical contractor ES to offer professional development opportunities for programs. We offer office hours every week for faculty, instructors, and supervising educators. We also offer candidate hours every week. So candidates can talk directly with commission staff and our technical contractor about any issues they're engaging in, and we are there to support them. We also offer monthly virtual think tanks. Every month on the last Friday, we offer the opportunity for programs to come together and talk to each other about best practices and how they support their candidates and faculty. And all of our work online, of course, is archived on our YouTube channel, so people can revisit that if they're not able to be with us in real time synchronously. In addition, we moved our once a year program coordinator workshops to 4 times a year to be able to share data and encourage programs to think carefully about rubrics that candidates were having challenges with and to offer support. We also do what we call deep dives, where we go through each cycle and talk through the steps, explain the evidence, and discuss the rubrics so that candidates and programs can access that as well. And we are always available through our email, and we offer outreach pretty much 24/7. Understanding the standard setting panel recommendation for future passing score standards encourages programs to assess what and how they need to improve their programs as they move forward and help all candidates reach the expectations for performance. And I'm sure as we move through time, we will eventually be back discussing whether the scores of 19, 17, and 17 are yet appropriate as were recommended 2 years ago. So with that, it brings me to staff recommendation and rationale. Staff recommends that the Commission continue to monitor the passing score data for administrative services candidates and continue to work towards adoption of the Cal APA Standard Setting Panel's recommendation. An application of a 0.75 SEM adjustment is recommended starting January of 2022. So months 7 months from now in the future. The recommendation is to move the passing point from 14 points for cycle 1 to 16, in cycles 2 and 3 from 12 to 14. Next steps would include, if you were to adopt this recommending set of passing scores with the 0.75 SEM applied, effective January of 2022, that we would then, of course, post on the our websites and distribute that information to the field to make sure that everyone was well aware of the increase to 16, 14, and 14, and the passing standard adopted by the Commission would be applied to all candidates, as I said, moving forward in time, and any scores achieved to date would be held as passing scores. And with that, I conclude this item.
Thank you so much. That's not an easy item. So really appreciate the detail, helping us walk through the pages and the tables. So I can't give enough appreciation. And so I'm just going to repeat what the staff recommendation here is. Okay, so staff recommends, and it's on the last page, that the Commission continue to monitor the passing score data for administrative services candidates and continue to work towards adoption of the Cal APA Standard Setting Panel's recommendation. An application of a 0.75 SEM adjustment is recommended starting. I think I actually just mixed my notes. Sorry. All right, okay. I'm going to have you read it because I just mixed my notes because I was typing notes as well as reading it. So can you just read it to us one more time, and then we're going to open it up for public comments.
Absolutely. So the recommendation is that the Commission, with its staff and evaluation systems, that we continue to monitor the passing score data for the administrative services candidates and continue to work towards adoption of the recommended expectation that was set 2 years ago. And the recommendation, though, right now in front of us is to determine whether or not the Commission staff should apply, and its technical contractor apply, a 0.75 SEM adjustment starting in January of 2022 that would move the passing standards for each of the 3 cycles up 2 points. So for cycle 1, it's currently at 14. We would move to 16. For cycles 2 and 3, the passing cut score is currently 12 points, and we would move to 14 points for each of cycle 2 and cycle 3. So a 2-point adjustment up in expectation of performance, and that's with that application of 0.75 instead of 1.5.
Great. Thank you so much. That we can depend on you and not my notes. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move to public comment right now. Again, public comment is limited to 2 minutes per person. If there's a member of the public that would like to give a presentation, please notify the meeting moderator by clicking on the raise hand icon. And if participating through the phone, *9. Recording secretary, are there any public comments?
Yes, Peg Winkleman, please unmute your mic and share your comment.
Yes, first, I just want to appreciate all of the support, Chief Deputy Director, that has been offered to programs, and to provide the caveat that what we're asking for is just a re-examination. So almost 2 years ago, I was able to attend the commission meeting in person when we had the opportunity to not only set scores, but celebrate, recognize the rollout of the CalPA, APA, an authentic assessment intentionally designed to engage new leaders in equity work. Tasks examining quantitative and qualitative data, leading professional learning, and coaching teachers to better serve the diverse population of California students. While we applauded the content of the assessment, we also problematized the disproportionate data, particularly in cycle 2, regarding scores on the submissions of candidates of color. The commission directed the field to interrogate the score discrepancies. Understandably, we have not had the time to examine, discuss, and apply research frames to the disturbingly disproportionate data. From research, we know that educators of color are most likely to serve communities of color. This raises many potential inquiries, questions, such as what are the conditions, i.e. high teacher turnover, in communities candidates serve, and how are these conditions addressed, taken into account within the assessment? For example, are we carefully reading candidates' reflections on historically marginalized communities and the challenges faced in developing learning communities with relevant, not cookie cutter problems of practice? Also, in considering how and when candidates complete the assessment tasks, are we considering the context within which candidates of color work? So for instance, in COVID times, many past candidates chose to prioritize their day jobs, serving their school communities, and deferred the CalAPA submission to their induction time. As Dr. Chung pointed out, we need to carefully consider who did and did not submit during the pandemic. Do we have a skewed sample of 2020-2021 submissions? As educators, one of the most important things we do is to model and practice reflection. We reflect, we take time to consider all aspects of an issue. At this time, we need more time to further consider the resetting of cut scores. Thank you very much, Commissioners.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, do we have other public comments?
Yes, John Borba. Please unmute your microphone and share your comment.
Good morning. My name is John Borba. I'm professor of school administration at California State University, Stanislaus. I wish to thank all of you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. Although I believe raising the APA scoring standard may be biased against minority candidates, I have another concern. My concern regarding the revision of the passing score standard is that it's meaningless if what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in terms of instructor support is vague and muddled. That's the problem right now. The CTC guidelines for assisting candidates with their written responses prior to submission is so wide that you can drive a truck through them. Every institution has its own interpretation regarding how much assistance can be provided to candidates in completing their APA responses. There are institutions that read the APAs of each candidate and provide oral and written response feedback prior to submission. On the opposite end of the spectrum, Some institutions do not provide oral and written feedback on the APA responses of candidates before submission to Pearson for scoring. Then you have everything in between. I am not accusing my colleagues at other institutions of any wrongdoing, since the CTC is allowing for a multitude of interpretations of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. My institution does not have the resources to offer special attention to each APA written response prior to submission. Some years we have as many as 100 candidates. Small programs can do this. We can't, which creates an unlevel playing field. At my institution, we have students do mock APAs in class. We share example responses, but we never see their actual submissions they do outside of class. In closing, consequently, this performance assessment lacks any kind of integrity, and therefore the results are meaningless. You can set the passing scores as high as you wish or as low as you wish, but the bottom line, it means nothing. Institutions need a very clear set of CTC guidelines regarding what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, so that there is consistency and continuity throughout the CTC approved school administration programs. That needs to be done before determining whether or not to raise passing scores. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Borba. Recording secretary, are there other public comments? And as you might see on the screen, we are keeping time, and then you hear the timer when the 2 minutes is up. So pardon us for being so specific here, but we know that we have a lot on the agenda and comments on this.
We are checking the list. There was an individual, but it appears that they have changed their mind, so we have no additional public comments. Oh, I'm sorry. I believe someone's trying to tell us they would like to make public comment.
Okay.
Noni Mendoza Reese.
Noni.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good to see everyone. I was on the standard setting panel a few years ago and was expecting to be called back. My comments today are, however, on the representation gap that the new cut scores being proposed indicate. So 2 years ago, we didn't have the Wallace report that just came out a few months ago on the findings about the importance of principles and we've always known for years, right, that the number one important is teacher quality, but Wallace report tells us no, that the importance of principles has been understated. They also have in their findings that this representation gap where we have the demographics of the students becoming more and more diverse while the demographics of the principals are not aligned. And then especially the finding that's interesting to me is the one about the equity lens that we know, but they also have talked about the importance of diversity in principles and how I think it's finding number 5. Principals are becoming more and more racially and ethnically diverse, but representation gaps with students are growing, which is concerning given the payoffs to principal diversity. That's what I want to speak about today, because in the cut scores that you mentioned, Amy, thank you so much. So basically what Wallace is telling us is leaders of colors count, and they make a difference in our schools. But a cut score, and I'm only looking at the Latino numbers for Latinx leaders, you said that from 313, that number would be, the percentage would be from 99 to 96 with the scores. That, if I'm doing my math right, that's 13. So 13 less principals of color would be, would pass the Cal APA. That means 13 less schools in California would be led by principals of color. So my point is that we really need to look at these numbers closer and address that representation gap. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for taking the time to call in. Recording secretary, other public comments?
I'm seeing no additional requests for public comment.
Great. Just give it a few more seconds in case. Okay. We will now close the public comment period for this item. Do commissioners have any questions or comments on this item? Commissioner Wall.
First of all, I want to compliment staff on, again, providing us with really great information to think about in terms of the recommendation. And I'm really pleased to see, because I know, just as the public comments noted, that there has been a lot of attention to potential differential impact by background group, and I think there's been careful work here to examine that, and that needs to continue. My question is this: I'm particularly curious about one statement, that the 2020-21 passing rate data, including review of subgroup analysis by ethnicity, does not support adjusting the passing standard to the full recommendation. So what I'm wondering actually is if that indicates that the full recommendation displays differential impact by background group. And if it does, how are we thinking about the potential long-term impact of that? Because, and I want to end with this before I answer the question, I really support changing this to the recommendation, because I think that it doesn't show a differential impact at the recommendation. But if you raise that expectation, if you begin to show differential impact, I think that's something for us to be really conscious of. And I'm just curious how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, so great question. And we have that data. We didn't include it in this item because we wanted to focus on the current data and the coming year and taking that half step. And I'll turn it to Heather, maybe to just speak about that data a little bit. Our overall pass rate dropped to about, I believe, Heather, check my memory on this, 67% pass rate at the full 19, 16, and 16 recommendation.
Right, for candidates that took all three cycles.
Mm-hmm. So I think Dr. Wall had a question that went to the subgroup analysis, which I believe we did. And I don't know if you want to just comment on that.
Amy, I'm trying to pull that up. I apologize.
Okay. No, that's okay. It's a very good question. We were carefully monitoring this data over the last 2 years, and frankly, quite confident in the data, bringing it forward to you, even in this COVID year, that we weren't seeing these differentials as we saw in that led us to setting the full 1.25. We actually had more Black candidates in this data set than we had in the prior. And you can see that at 97% and 97%, they're passing. But there is fluctuation. There's no doubt about it. There is some minor fluctuation here. But pretty much across the board for candidates who complete all three cycles, they're doing, an amazing job of passing at 99, 100, and 100%. So I don't know, Heather, if that gave you a second. We can continue to just. Oh, thank you. Okay.
No, I have it.
For you there for a minute. Okay, great.
So, thank you. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So looking at the impact, then we modeled it at a cut score of cycle 1 at 17 and cycles 2 and 3 at 19. Correct, Amy? Those are our numbers. No. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well,
go ahead. I'm
just
sorry.
Repeat that again. The passing scores for cycle 1, 2, and 3. We modeled it at
1 at 17 and 2 and 3 at 19. And with the impact that we would have on candidates' percent pass rates, we do see all at a 66% pass rate. And then moving over across our groups, we're in the 60s and the 50s for many groups. So not applicable, folks who have not told us their ethnicity group at 61%, Black at 65%, Asian 53%, Southeast Asian 57%, Pacific Islander 80%, Hispanic 70%, Native American 50%, White 66%, and other at 79%. So in the review of that data preliminarily, and again, these are modeled pass rates, taking the data that we have and applying that projected standard, that is where the commission then arrived at a midpoint.
Right. Yeah, and that was for passing, the passing scores at 19, 17, and 17.
So I think that this shows, thank you so much for that. I think it shows how smart of a recommendation this is, because you're making a recommendation where there isn't differential impacts, right? And I'm assuming you statistically tested that across these small differences. And I think that's really important. And then I also think it points to the work that we still have to do about thinking about what happens forward, which I think some of the public comment also illustrated. And so I think you're making a really smart recommendation, and thanks for the answer to that question.
Thank you. And as Amy chimed in, I just want to mention that was at a passing score modeled at 19 for cycle 1, 17 for cycle 2, and 17 for cycle 3. My apologies.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Klisch, and everybody. I'm going to go to, in order, is Commissioner Grenoff-Shire, Commissioner Jackson, and then Commissioner Cardenas.
Thank you, Commissioner Martinez. Commissioner Wall raised the issue in a much more sophisticated way than I was able to articulate, but I wanted to support what he said. I wanted to reflect the first and third public comments and the concerns regarding the potential disparate impact on principals of color. I want to thank Amy and Heather for this incredibly detailed and complex report. And I also want to thank you for your continued vigilance to ensure that the Cal APA does not result in any implicit bias. I read through the public comments and I believe you have answered them. I would encourage the staff to continue to be mindful of this as we move forward. So thank you.
Well, thank you for your comments. Commissioner Jackson.
And just to follow up on that, reading the written comments and then just the public comments today, what was the understanding of the standard setting committee? You know, they met a couple of years ago and did that great work. And then was there an understanding that they would come back and be able to like examine, you know, the data and all of that? Or was it an understanding one time come together and then the commission staff would then take it forward? So I just wanted to get an understanding of that.
Yeah. So what I will say to that is this. We need to do passing standard studies as we need to do them. And so the agreement was that we would do the first one. We would bring the data forward. The U.S. commissioners would adopt an initial passing standard. We emphasized then, as we're emphasizing today, that programs need time to learn how to embed this in their programs and support candidates. And because there are properties of this embedded performance assessment, as Dr. Borba pointed out, candidates can engage with educated others as they come through these assessments. We want them to be learning as they go. And so to help that happen, programs, all their faculty, their supervising staff, all need to have a deep understanding of the CAPE. First of all, those expectations we set for our administrators, and then the understanding of how these embedded performance assessments can be enacted. We publish actual responses by candidates of these performance assessments for candidates to look at those published examples. And we have lots of supports in place, but it takes time. It takes quite a long time to really truly embed these performance assessments in programs and weave them through coursework and clinical practice in a way that they become educative and supportive of growth and development. So we really want to protect that time and make sure that time is in place for that to happen in California. So that being said, at the end of that first standard setting study, what we said was we're going to move this forward. We're going to come back and monitor the data and continue to look at the data and think about the passing scores that were set at 19, 17, and 17 and watch the subgroup data carefully to see if and how and when progress will be made, because I think progress is absolutely being made. And we see it slightly in the increase in scores even during a COVID year, which was incredibly challenging. So to me, that's all very hopeful. And the aspirations that we set out, programs are starting to meet them, but we don't want to rush, right? So I think that what we want to do is when we have a data set, perhaps as soon as next spring or perhaps the year after, we should absolutely do another standard setting and look again carefully at actual submissions by candidates and really look at that evidence firsthand and look at the data that then begins to support decision making. So the expectation at the time of the closing of the panel was we will monitor and we will come back and do a panel standard setting study when it makes logical, good, sort of psychometrically defensible logic to do that. So we may be there, and that may be the very next step we need to do in the next year or so. Thank you for asking that question.
Thank you, Commissioner Jackson. Commissioner Cardenas, if anybody else wants to raise their hand.
Thank you very much to commission staff and to Amy and to Heather for this presentation, and just even for your answer right now, as far as institutions really needing more time to understand and to really develop. And this has been a long ordeal, as you said, 6 years in the making. And during that time in 2019, when you met with this committee, and there's a lot of written comments regarding this, COVID hit, right? And because of COVID, there's been so many resources that have been stretched very thin. And in some institutions, as Dr. Borba had alluded to, is that in some institutions, they do have less resources. And with COVID, there's even less now, right? I was looking at people retiring, and there might be less resources with people retiring in those administration programs. And also people becoming administrators, they've been stretched thin if they themselves were educators. And so to me, it honestly sounds like this is a great idea to move slowly, to incrementally move up. But is this the right time? Because I look at that January 2022 timeline, that's only 6 months away, and I can see a lot of people being fearful of that. And then when we look at just numbers instead of percentages, those are actual people that will not move forward in this process. And if they don't move forward, what are the other support systems embedded to ensure that they can continue to pass this, or have another opportunity to pass, or have other support systems to have those opportunities to be administrators, because people want to do that. So I do agree that, we need time and to move slowly, but is this the right time to move forward with it being 6 months away? And so much has happened within this course of a year and a half. I do have some, concerns of who it affects as soon as we move it to that incremental change, how it affects certain populations by a much larger percentage, which means much larger numbers. But again, we do have to start moving, like Commissioner Wall had mentioned, we do have to start having higher expectations, but my concern is this the right time? So I appreciate all the work that you've done with this. I have seen all the written comments. Thank you for everybody who's written in and has called in, and also voiced your concerns.
Thank you, Commissioner Cardenas. Any other questions or comments? Okay, Chair Slow.
Yeah, I do want to thank everyone for their comments here too, as well as the people who wrote and discussed some of these important issues. And I had some thinking to Commissioner Cardenas with regards to timing. And given the members of the design panel and the standard setting panel who also spoke and gave comments, what I'm curious about, Heather and Amy, is what we might do if we reconvene the standard setting panel. What kind of data would we have now to look at? What kind of processes might we engage them in if we were to reconvene them, given the comments and the feedback you have been hearing and also things you've been thinking about yourselves?
Amy, I'm happy to chime in if you'd like.
Yeah, why don't you go first and I'll follow up.
Sure. So I think in reconvening a panel, even though we may be thinking of it as it's not necessarily confirmatory, right? We would want them to have access to the latest data, which is what we utilized for this item, keeping in mind that the standard setting panel reviewed data from 2 years ago. We have more current data. We also looked at consequential candidates, which Amy framed that for you in terms of non-consequential and consequential. That's important because we believe that that is looking ahead more indicative of your future population, right? Because you no longer have that trial year of the non-consequential candidates. When we did the standard setting in 19, we had non-consequential and consequential mixed in the data set. We took as much data as we could. So I think, Chair Sloan, to answer your question, I would think you'd want to replicate the process that we did previously with the benefit of knowing where the initial panel fell out, and then also putting perhaps more time into our review of the subgroup analyses as a specific portion of that standard setting process. It is embedded in our process, both in terms of descriptive data as well as impact data, but we could specifically carve that out as a explicit activity to be sure that we're walking through all of the performance data as well as potential impact to all of the subgroup reports. Amy?
Exactly. I think absolutely what we have seen anecdotally in the qualitative review of thousands of submissions is improvement in practice. So we would absolutely want, as Heather pointed out, to be looking at the most recent data and the actual responses themselves, and to really understand, I think, to the way performance is described in our rubrics, and together collectively as a community of educators, understand the aspirationalness in some of those levels, but also to have that very specific and open conversation looking at real evidence by candidates about what is possible and what is practical and what is feasible, and where we are in the state of California and where do we want to go. So standard setting processes really help illuminate answers to all of those questions with educators. And it would be interesting to recall the standard setting panel that did work with us 2 years ago, but I might even recommend that we augment that with additional educators. We have a lot of turnover in our state. We would love to have more and more people come and join these conversations with us and really have that opportunity to think about practice and think about where we want to be as we move together in preparing our administrators in California. And absolutely to think deeply about issues related to diversifying our workforce and understanding what are the kinds of supports that need to be in place to make sure that all of our candidates get the kind of support that they need. And we know support needs are different and contextually dependent. So we would want to bring all of that back into the conversation, I think, and have that opportunity to talk together to get to a decision.
I think that sounds great. And I don't know I've served on standard setting panels before, and I know it's in doing so, you're very focused on understanding the work and diving deep into the work, both the artifacts and scores. And it's extremely important to look deeply at what candidates are conveying in terms of their practice, but then to also be able to sort of take that experience and collaboration with the diversity of educators and administrators, and then maybe on a second or third day say, here's what we've learned that can inform implementation it could inform expectations, that can inform information to the field, so that we can be, ensure that candidates are receiving the kinds of supports across their programs that they both need and that are appropriate. I'm a little concerned in hearing things like faculty are editing candidates' responses. That, if you're editing for grammar, that's one thing, but content and is another, right? So anyway, it would be, I think this sounds like a really fantastic opportunity for the commission to come back and do this again. If we do this, when would you suggest we might be able to do this, and why? Why that time?
So, okay, you can hear me, right? I keep seeing my mute buttons on, but we use different technology, so my apologies. Here's what I think, and it's just my opinion. So Heather, you chime in with me. But we are moving every spring, as promised. We do a very comprehensive review of feedback from our assessors, from our programs, and from our candidates. And we sit down and revise and edit the cycle guides and the rubrics for clarity and making sure that we have done all we can on our side to make these complex assessments as clear as possible and the expectations for performance as clear as possible. And so we have done some editing again this spring because it takes time for us to understand where candidates are being perhaps misled or are confused by something or are struggling with a rubric. And that's what is the positive side of performance assessment. We have these analytic rubrics. They're at 5 levels of descriptive performance, and we can very much look at that and say, well, they're really struggling with this. Is it that practice needs to come up and support, or is it that the language is confusing? And each year for the last 3 years, and again this spring, we have made some additional revisions and edits. So that being said, when we launch into our operational year, which begins in July and into August, and we start scoring in the fall, there have been some improvements in place. So we would want to look at candidates' responses to that new version. It's not really new, it's improved, it's clarified, right? It's to the candidate's advantage to use the new operational version, we believe. So we would want to look, I would recommend, at the data that we begin to gather in August, September through the year, and sit in the spring together then and look at that data. Heather, would you want to add to that? Or do you, we could also pull in this year's data, but it's COVID. COVID was a strange year.
Right. No, I think those are great points, Amy. And then what can happen with that is obviously there's all of the, after you conduct the meeting itself and you pull together all of the information and come forward with an item such as this, there needs to be then time for programs and candidates to know when this will be implemented. So we'd want to back it up from that as well to think about, if we really wanted to conduct another standard setting and implement something for the next program year starting summer of 22, then we'd want to have ample time to be able to just message that out to programs. That would be the caveat, or whatever the rollout time may need to be. But I just do want to think about messaging and preparedness for candidates and programs.
Yeah.
Well,
and we picked. I was just going to add one other thought. Sorry. We had picked January 1st of 2022 as a starting point for implementation because in our non-consequential work, that's how we set the conclusion of the non-consequential window for candidates of December 31st of 2020. That was just this past December. So coming into January 2021 was when we said you need to be, we can only take now consequential responses. So that's why we picked that. But Heather is spot on there. We need to make sure that if a new standard is established, that programs have time to understand and set those expectations then with their candidates and in the way they're modeling and discussing performance.
So are you saying then if we convene the standard setting panel in the spring, and the new standard setting or the standard setting panel reconvenes and they suggest now we think this is where the cut score should be. How long do you think it would be before we could implement that?
I guess I would recommend. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this recommendation today is looking at about 6 months out, and even that, I think, drew some comments about the timing. And so I think the question would be, is 6 months ample time to be able to notify candidates and programs that we have a potentially new change in the passing standard expectation? Not knowing what those outcomes will be, it's hard to guess that, but I think picking a milestone date as either the beginning of a program year or that January 1st date, as Amy alluded to, those tend to be an easier cutover to be able to then communicate. But picking a date that is in the a middle of a semester or a middle of a program year that's not linked to a milestone date, that gets a little tougher to communicate. So I just want to think about that in terms of timing.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I would just add their trade-offs. If we were to back up the standard setting study to January, let's say, so that we could come perhaps into 6-7 months forward in time, like the following fall-ish time, although admin programs start every month of the year. So we found in our work with programs that there's no academic year for administrative services programs. But that aside, there's trade-offs. So if we looked at data only from the fall, it may not be as robust a set of data as if we give it 6 more months of time, so we can have a larger set of data that we may feel, that we could defend as more generalizable. So that's the trade-off. If we move earlier, we might be able to say we could move within the year 2022 or 23 to a different passing standard. And if we wanted really the data and we did it late in the spring of 2022, we may not we may advise you to wait, another 6 to 8 months or a full year before you set the next level of step up. But these are all trade-offs and all questions that we would be happy to examine and explore and bring back for further discussion.
Mm-hmm. So where I am then is in my thinking, I would like to suggest that we do reconvene the standard setting panel and do the things that both of you, Heather and Amy, described. Where I am not sure then at this moment in time is whether to recommend that we do increase the 0.75. The differences in pass rates are quite small, so that argues for it's an argument on both sides. They're quite small, so why raise it at this point? On the other hand, they're quite small, so we can raise it. So if any other commissioners have a sense of this, that would help me before anybody makes a motion.
I guess my question is, could we do both? Or to your point, Chair Sloan, is it so incremental that we don't do both? But could we pass the recommendation on page 8 and put together or reconvene the standard setting panel?
Yes, I think we can do that. And we can also just do the panel.
Executive Director Sandy?
I just wanted to throw a couple thoughts into the mix as well. I appreciate that I think it sounds like we're coming to consensus that another full standard setting process is worth our time. I absolutely agree. I think it's a good time to do it. I would strongly recommend that we do it based on the full scope of data we collect next year. And I'm not sure, Heather or Amy, you may have there may be a technical answer to this question, but I'm not sure whether it makes sense to change the passing standard mid-year that we're collecting data for standard setting, because following the standard setting study, you'll see how candidates perform against the rubrics. And you'll be able to decide right then, as you look at and review those data, whether you want to adopt a new passing standard as recommended by your panel or stage the adoption of that and set, within 1 year we'll go up by this amount, by year this X, Y, or Z, we intend to get to the full passing standard. Part of the value of setting that expectation clearly for programs and for candidates is that the more programs are getting these data back, and seeing how their candidates are performing against a standard and anticipating where they're going to need to get to by such and such date, it helps them to sharpen and focus their programs. I think. I mean, that's the theory of providing these data and setting a goal horizon for meeting a particular standard gives the programs have, I think, a very strong incentive to be really intensely on top of their data and the kinds of preparation and support that they're providing. So I don't know, Heather, you're the professional psychometrician in the room. Does it make sense to take a partial step mid-year of a year that you're collecting data to do a full standard setting?
No, it's a great question, because I think this partial step, as we've seen, does have some impact, but it is a small impact. I think that you may have some candidates who choose to try to get their submission in before that standard changes, but regardless, we would still capture that in our data. I do think it's a consideration, though, in discussing for those who may choose not to submit, population differences that we may see in terms of folks who decide to wait. They decide to wait it out, and they know that there's a standard setting panel that's going to be convened, and they're going to wait to see what the result of that is, because that may be even more different than where we are today. So it definitely is a factor. And I just, as to the complexity, I think it would add another layer of complexity if we were to shift the passing standard for January and announce that a standard setting panel was being convened shortly thereafter, because you would be communicating to the field multiple iterations of performance expectations.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you for the conversation. It looks like Commissioner Heredia would like to get in. Just really quickly, Commissioner Heredia, did you want to comment back, though, Chair Sloan, or?
I yes, I do. I would prefer to wait just for the reasons that Heather articulated, that I think this double message out to, candidates, institutions, I think that's more problematic than the change right now. And like Commissioner Sloan, she noted that, at some institutions, you could have faculty helping students to adjust what they submit. And so I think the other question is that we need to ask ourselves too, is that, there must be a good reason. I mean, there must be some desperate, in terms of what institutions are feeling in terms of their candidates and the limited resources and to what degree that they can help. So I think also that clarification on to what degree can you assist a student and what's that criteria, is important. But again, I'm not in favor of giving multiple messages to candidates.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Great point. And Chair Sloan?
All right, then, given this robust discussion, given the tumultuous pandemic years that our candidates have been preparing in and our programs have been working in, given the need to look to disaggregate our cycles and scores in different ways that we would like to examine, I would move that we do not change the passing standard at this time. And I don't know if we need a motion that also includes convening the standard setting panel again early, in the spring of 2022, when we have our next cycles of documents in.
It would be fine for you to give that as staff direction, and we will conduct the study.
All right. Does this require a vote?
Not sure. So why don't you go ahead and take it, and we'll cover all our bases. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion by Chair Sloan to not pass the recommendations on page 8. And I guess I will throw in there and to read in a recommendation. I think you said we can do this, reconvene the standard setting panel based on the full scope of the data in 2022. So that's the motion. And do we have a second? And let me enlarge my screen. Okay, Commissioner Cardenas, thank you. We have a second. So we're going to go ahead and go for the vote. And so will the recording secretary, is there any further discussion? My apologies. Just want to check back in with folks. This has been a long and a very important topic. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move to the vote. And so will the recording secretary call for the vote? Each member of the commission respond with aye, nay, or abstain.
Jose Cardenas.
Aye.
C. Michael Cooney.
Aye.
Michael De La Torre.
Aye.
Marisol De La Torre Escobedo.
Aye.
Megan Gross.
Aye.
Johanna Howard.
Aye.
Susan Aradia.
Aye.
Terry Jackson.
Aye.
Bonnie Clark.
Aye.
Monica Martinez.
Aye.
David Simmons.
Aye.
Gina Sloan.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Reesing and Ms. Klush. And I know Ms. Robbie was somewhere in the background for your expertise and the amount of information and data you're able to provide to us. Thank you for all those who called in and wrote with public comments. And thank you, commissioners, for examining this issue at the depth by which you did. I'm going to turn over to Chair Sloan to talk about the rest of the day. And then we promise a break is in store.
Yes. All right. So we still have a rather robust agenda today here on a Friday, a little more than we are maybe accustomed to. So here's our thinking. We think that we have at least another 2.5 hours of items, and we are going to need some breaks, but we also don't want to lose a quorum. So we are suggesting we do a 15-minute break now. We come back, we finish a few more items, probably with professional services, and then, educator preparation. Yeah, so many different acronyms with Chair Martinez. And then we take another 15-minute break, and then we finish the meeting. Does that sound okay to you? Okay, so just plan. You've got 2 15-minute breaks in your future. And we're just going to start one now, 11:05. So let's come on back at 11. Where are 5, 10, 15, 20, 11:20. All right. See you.
Thank you, everyone, so much. We'll see you in 15.
We do have enough for quorum if you would like to start.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. I do appreciate that. Yes, let's get started. Item 4D is proposed teaching performance assessment. TPA requirements for dual credential candidates and proposed updates to TPA assessment design standards. This item is being presented by James Webb and Amy Reesing. This is an information action item. And again, for those of you who will be making public comments, you're welcome to raise your hand before the public comment period opens so that we have a sense of who might be commenting. Ms. Reesing, will you please begin?
Thank you. And still morning. Good morning again, commissioners. Back with another TPA item, this time focused on education specialists and our work that is underway there. So the title of this item is Proposed Teaching Performance Assessment Requirements for Dual Credential Candidates, candidates who are pursuing 2 credentials simultaneously, and then a few proposed updates to the TPA assessment design standards, a document by which we guide all of our performance assessment development work in California. So with that, I will begin with an overview and introduction to the item. The item presents considerations for teacher credential candidates who may pursue a general education credential multiple subject or single subject, and at the same time, an education specialist credential. And we need to think about how and when they engage in performance assessment. We will also discuss candidates who are pursuing 2 education specialist credentials simultaneously, typically the mild to moderate credential with the extensive supports. Staff also presents minor revisions to the assessment design standards for review so that they are more inclusive of candidates seeking education specialist credentials and the context in which they work. In addition, staff presents questions for the Commission's discussion and deliberation as it relates to credential candidates who want to add a credential to a foundational credential. So a little background on our education specialist work. In February 2018, the Commission adopted a revised credential structure for the education specialist teaching credentials. The new structure included 5 preliminary teaching credentials, mild to moderate support needs, extensive support needs, visual impairments, deaf and hard of hearing, and the 5th credential, early childhood special education. Restructuring the education specialist credential included a determination by the Commission that every teacher candidate should take and pass a teaching performance assessment prior to earning their preliminary teaching credential. During the 2018 meeting, the Commission reviewed proposed standards and teaching performance expectations, as well as proposed subject matter requirements for these credentials. At its August 2018 meeting, the Commission adopted standards and teacher performance expectations for the education specialist mild to moderate and extensive support needs credentials, and in the following year, April 2019, adopted authorization statements for these credentials. An important outcome in your reform work in both SPED and general ed over the last several years is the development of a common or universal set of TPEs, in other words, TPEs that are required by both general education credential pursuers as well as our education specialists. The universal TPEs establish a common foundation for all teachers based on the concept that all teachers are teachers of all children and students, and that all students are general education students first, and that all students need intervention at different points in their academic career. The Commission's goal in establishing universal TPEs was to ensure that all teachers learn the fundamentals of teaching, ideally in common coursework that allows for collaboration across credential types and specialization in the content of their credential area, one of those 5 areas, either multiple subject, single subject, mild to moderate support needs, extensive support needs, visual impairment, deaf and hard of hearing, and early childhood special education. In Appendix A, you will see more information that lays out these types of credentials. The development of the education specialist TPA has occurred against the backdrop of these significant changes in the framing of teacher preparation across the range of credentials. How to balance attention between the universal TPEs, those TPEs that all teachers should know and be able to demonstrate, and the specialized TPEs, that specialized pedagogy within a credential type, has been a driving question as stakeholders and stakeholders and design team members consider what shape the education specialist TPA might take. An issue that surfaced during the fall 2020 pilot study of our education specialist TPA instructional cycles and ongoing discussions with our design team for the education specialist TPA was how would candidates enrolled in dual multiple credential programs meet the TPA requirements for both gen ed and special ed. The Commission's design team is continuing to refine the education specialist TPA for MMSN, mild to moderate, and extensive support needs credential pursuers, which is currently undergoing a pilot study. We are in the midst of scoring that work right now as we talk this week. And we are getting ourselves ready. We're doing that hard, deep look at these pilots and revising them and getting ready for our field test that will be held starting this fall in the 21-22 academic year, and then finalized for operational administration in the fall of 2022-23. So we are 1 year into our 2-year design of the education specialist performance assessments. The commission staff continue to consult with the field and the design team about how we can implement and maintain the integrity of the credential SAW, while not burdening our candidates with multiple measures of the same knowledge and skills. And we believe in transfer, and we think that skills once demonstrated hold across credential types. The remainder of this item includes an overview of the Cal TPA and Ed Specialist TPA that is under development, a summary of the design team's recommendations regarding the TPA requirements for dual multiple credential candidates, and a few proposed amendments to the assessment design standards. In addition, we have a few questions for you commissioners to deliberate and discuss regarding other dual multiple credential situations, and we'll get into those questions in a minute. For now, I'm going to turn it to my colleague James Webb, who will take us through the next section of the item.
Thank you, Amy, and good morning, commissioners, Chair Sloan and Commissioner Martinez, for the opportunity to come and present this item with you today. So what I would like to do is provide for you an overview of the Cal TPA and Ed Specialist Cal TPA as it is currently in form, to give you an idea about what are the commonalities and unique features of these two performance assessments. One of the items that carried over from the general education Cal TPA was that candidates would pass both of the cycles of instruction following the plan, teach and assess, reflect, and apply steps, as we all agree that these are the fundamental steps when approaching teaching tasks and areas for candidates when they become professionals in their careers to always follow. It supports the educative quality of the Ed Specialist Cal TPA and also builds upon those existing structures and assesses the unique teaching performance expectations for education specialist candidates. In addition, programs can support candidates in improving their teaching based on their assessment results from each of the cycles, preferably with cycle 1, and then providing formative feedback as the candidate moves into cycle 2. But of course, there is no structure as to completing one cycle before the other, but it is understood that there is the chance for formative feedback for the candidates to be provided by the programs. On page 3 of the item, we have listed the common features of the Cal TPA and the Ed Specialist Cal TPA. What I would like to do is point to specific references for your consideration that really show that unique aspect of the Cal TPA, but also came into the Ed Specialist, and then I would like to go into the specific unique features of the Education Specialist Cal TPA. The first piece is that instructional planning is always based on student assets and funds of knowledge, to come at it from an asset-based approach as opposed to a deficit mindset when working with students on a range of content-specific expectations and curriculum. Educational technology is also infused in both cycles of instruction, with an emphasis on supporting students to become a digital citizen, and this holds for both the general education and the Education Specialist Cal TPA to ensure equity with students with disabilities with their general education peers. Video of instruction and assessment of students is directed, specific, and annotated. Candidates have the opportunity to view their videos and annotate the how and why of their planning and of their instructional decisions as they move forward in the cycle to again model the recursive nature of the plan, teach and assess, reflect and apply. Specific subject focus on literacy and mathematics, with one cycle focusing on teaching literacy, the other teaching on mathematics, and the support of integration of the subject matter is recommended, and it promotes candidate reflection in each instructional cycle. A core principle of the design is universal design for learning theory, which is required in the instructional planning and assessment, again to showcase the how and the why of learning through multiple modalities. And finally, the common element is the English language development emphasis for identified ELD students and those students who require academic language development. Towards the end of page 3, we see the unique features of the Education Cal TPA, in that all 3 focus students are receiving specialized services with an IEP, and that small groups of students may all have IEPs. Again, it depends on the candidate's placement and the caseload for which the candidate has been assigned, if they are indeed an intern. Very important is the facilitation of instructional support personnel to engage and support all students in learning, to promote that communication, cooperation, and collaboration with other educators, to provide a network of services for students in terms of their learning and their well-being. The instructional support personnel can take on the role of a general education teacher, a counselor, an administrator, a behaviorist, or any adult providing services to a student to support these goals. Instructional design is based on knowing students' language and communication needs and that academic language development to promote their academic and social emotional support. And as we are seeing with our credential candidates and also with the authorization statements of the credential, the functional skills can be infused as appropriate in content learning to allow for foundational skills and or life skills to complement literacy and mathematics. There's also an emphasis on developmentally appropriate higher order thinking skills and deep learning of content in the lesson and assessments that education specialist candidates provide. Universal design for learning was placed in level 3 of the analytic rubric for the Ed Specialist Cal TPA. Assistive technology to help students with understanding content is included in instruction and assessment planning. In cycle 2, including family and or guardians through sharing classroom-based assessment results and establishing supports for students both in and outside of the classroom has been added into the reflection and application portions of the assessment. And it is scored by assessors holding the matching education specialist credential in order to provide the appropriate feedback and scoring with each cycle. I'm going to turn it back over to Amy to start with our different parts of the item, and she will begin with candidates who are seeking 2 or more credentials simultaneously for considerations by the Commission.
Thank you, James. So while most candidates for an education specialist credential enroll in a program that leads to 1 credential, the majority of our candidates are in programs that lead to 1 credential. We do have programs where dual credentials are pursued. We have 25 institutions in California that have been approved to offer candidates opportunities to complete a dual credential program that integrates general education and special education or multiple areas of specialization within the education specialist credential. These programs are listed for you in Appendix B. At the May 2021 design team meeting for the Ed Specialist Cal TPA, representatives from the 5 credential areas of emphasis for the education specialist credential grappled with questions of how a performance assessment could be administered to candidates who are earning more than 1 credential and learning and practicing different pedagogical approaches to support their students. For example, a candidate who's pursuing at the same time a general education credential, either multiple subject or single subject, and an education specialist credential. Several questions came up for our panel. Should candidates be required to take and pass both the general ed TPA and the ed specialist TPA? What might be the impact on the pipeline with this kind of assessment load? If candidates were required to take and pass only 1 TPA, which one should they take? And finally, how would candidates demonstrate their ability to meet the TPEs for both credentials? We have quite a number of explicit TPEs. The overwhelming consensus from our design team was that the dual credential candidates should only be required to complete 1 TPA and that they complete the TPA in the area of greatest specialization. For example, a candidate seeking dual credentials for mild, moderate, and extensive support needs would complete their TPA in the more specialized setting of extensive support needs. A candidate seeking both a multiple subject and a mild to moderate credential would complete their TPA in the more specialized setting of mild to moderate. As indicated in the overview of the Cal TPA and its specialist TPA above that James just walked you through, both forms of TPA focus on 4 major steps: how a teacher plans for instruction and assessment, how they then get up on their feet and teach and assess, check for understanding, how they reflect on that practice and experience of those lessons and assessments, and then how they apply what they've learned as they go forward and work with those students again. 4 major steps. Though the students and settings in which these candidates teach may differ, the approach to designing student-centered, asset-based instruction, assessing student learning, and applying lessons learned to the next round of teaching are the same for both. Both the Gen Ed and Education Specialist credentials address the universal TPEs, those common TPEs that are identical from the Gen Ed set of TPEs to the Education Specialist set of TPEs. Those are called universal. And then the TPA methodology, which is grounded in the universal TPEs writ large across all teaching credentials. Further, candidates for dual credentials will be learning and applying the TPEs for both and will have clinical experiences. This is a very important component. They will have and are required to have clinical experiences that span both of their settings for both types of credentials. And this opportunity to learn is explained for you in Appendix C, the expectations for clinical practice when candidates are pursuing multiple credentials. In summary, the consensus recommendation of our design team was the following. Again, teaching candidates pursuing general education and mild to moderate and or extensive support needs credentials should take the TPA 1 time and in the more specialized credential area. Teaching candidates pursuing mild to moderate and ESN credentials, both 2 education specialist credentials, should take the extensive support needs TPA. Dual credential candidates should complete the 2 cycles for 1 TPA in 1 credential area only. In other words, these candidates should not be allowed to mix and match, doing 1 cycle in a mild to moderate setting, for example, and a second cycle, cycle 2 in Gen Ed, because there are unique properties to the rubrics, and there are also unique TPEs that are measured in the MMSN and ESN assessment cycles. So you can't mix and match Gen Ed with education specialists, but you could take the full Gen Ed, or you could take the full mild to moderate, or you could take the full ESN. Finally, information from the data dashboard, the 2019-2020 data, indicated that 90% of our education specialist credentials are in fact issued in the mild to moderate support needs and extensive support needs credential areas of emphasis, 90% of our candidates. Candidates pursuing lower incidence credential areas, DHH, VI, and early childhood, are not included in this item at this time. In our prior meeting in April, you indicated that we could have an additional year of study to develop these lower incidence performance assessments. And so in this item in front of you today around dual credential pursuit, we're only talking about mild to moderate and extensive support needs and general education. But we are not today discussing DHH, deaf and hard of hearing credential pursuers, visual impairments, or early childhood at this time. Programs use the following 2018 guidelines to advise dual credential seekers granting equivalency 2018. There's a link there for you to follow. Several questions arise, in addition to the ones we've already posed, for you to consider in regard to the TPA requirements. These 3 questions are provided for you on page 5, and I will just go over them very quickly, and we'll come back to them. 1, should the Commission apply the same approach to these credential holders as it does for dual multiple credential candidates who simultaneously pursue 2 or more credentials? Is 1 TPA sufficient? Question number 2, should passage of a TPA be required for these candidates even if they have already passed a TPA to earn their first credential? And question number 3, if adding an education specialist credential to a general education credential, should the candidate be able to have a choice of either taking additional coursework and completing specific clinical practice in the new educational setting or taking an additional TPA. We're trying to so we've been discussing what we do to support candidates who are dually enrolled, and now we're asking some questions about candidates who do one credential and then come back and want to pursue a second credential. What kinds of guidelines would we put in place for those candidates? So finally, should a TPA only pathway be considered for general ed credential holders seeking to add an education specialist credential? So lots of complexity in the field here around pursuing multiple credentials, but we want to come back and have discussions around TPA and assessment load and what is appropriate, what is equitable, and what is fair. So that brings us, and we'll come back to these questions for discussion, but now I want to turn it to James to finish the item and just talk a little bit about the assessment design standards and what we need to do there to make sure that we're encompassing the full context for education specialists, understanding that those credentials allow the work with families and babies, infants and toddlers, all the way through age 22 adults. James?
Thank you, Amy. I'm on the bottom of page 5, and we're looking at minor revisions to the assessment design standards. As a reminder, at the January 2020 meeting, we brought an item where we revised or recommended that revisions be made to the assessment design standards to include the education specialist context. Staff, in its continued review of the assessment design standards, determined that the development of the education specialist Cal TPA needs an additional minor additions to the first design standard, which is assessment design for validity and fairness. The revisions that we are proposing define the content standards for special education candidates so that they align with the adopted credential authorization statements and provide additional flexibility for candidates who may be in a general education and/or education specialist setting. So specifically, we drew your attention to the bolded language in each one of the standards. So in Standard 1C, the proposed change would read, consistent with the language of the TPEs, the model sponsor defines scoring rubrics so candidates for credentials can earn acceptable scores on the teaching performance assessment with the use of different content-specific pedagogical practices that support implementation of the birth to age 22 content standards and curriculum frameworks. The emphasis is on birth to age 22 because as we are familiar with our credential areas of emphasis, many of the authorizations do allow for working with children from the age of being first born up to the age of 22. In Standard 1D, the proposed change would read, the model sponsor must include within the design of the TPA candidate tasks a focus on addressing the teaching of English learners, all underserved education groups or groups that need to be served differently, and students with special needs in the general education classroom and/or specialized settings to adequately assess the candidate's ability to effectively teach all students. The addition of the and/or specialized settings allow for a variety of settings or clinical practices that education specialist candidates would be placed, and also supports the beginnings of co-teaching and co-facilitation to allow for students with disabilities to be included in general education classrooms with their peers in the least restrictive environment. And finally, Standard 1I again adds the birth through age 22, and so the revision would read, the statement demonstrates the model sponsor's clear understanding of the implications of the assessment for candidates, preparation programs, the public schools, and birth through age 22 students. Again, this is necessary, and our recommendation is that it would mirror the authorization statements that are currently with the credential areas of emphasis. So Amy will take us through the final staff recommendations, and then we will open it to our next phase of consideration.
Thank you, James. So on page 6 at the bottom, we lay out our recommendations as staff. First recommendation, a candidate seeking both a general education credential, so either multiple subject or single subject, and a mild to moderate support needs credential through a dual credential program would take and pass the mild to moderate support needs TPA. This would require only one TPA in the specialist credential and would still allow for demonstration of the universal TPEs as they are embedded in the newly adopted education specialist credentials. That's our first recommendation. Second recommendation, a candidate seeking both a Gen Ed credential and an ESN credential would take and pass the extensive support needs TPA. This would require, again, only one TPA in the specialist credential and would still allow for demonstration of the universal TPEs as they are embedded in the newly adopted education specialist credentials. Recommendation 3, a candidate, and we do have some candidates in this case, are seeking 3 credentials simultaneously. In this case that we're putting forward, let's imagine a candidate who is pursuing a general education credential, a mild to moderate support needs credential, and an extensive support needs credential. This type of candidate would take and pass the extensive support needs TPA. Again, this would require only one TPA in the specialist credential and would still allow for demonstration of the universal TPEs. Fourth recommendation, a candidate seeking both a mild to moderate support needs and an extensive support needs credential, so 2 credentials within the education specialist space, would take and pass the extensive support needs TPA. This would require, again, only one TPA and would still allow for demonstration of the universal TPEs. Our fifth recommendation is what James just walked you through, which are minor revisions to the assessment design standards for 1C, 1D, and 1I. And James, you want to just take us through the next steps and we'll come back for discussion.
Yes, thank you, Amy. So our next steps, staff will continue to work with the Education Specialist Cal TPA design team using the guidance provided by the Commission. Staff will continue to update the Commission on the Education Specialist Performance Assessment development as we move into the field test, which again begins in the fall of 2021 for our mild to moderate support needs and extensive support need credential areas of emphasis. And in the spring of 2022, staff will provide updates for the ongoing development of the lower incident areas of deaf and hard of hearing, visual impairments, and early childhood special education.
And that concludes our item. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and appreciate the way you guys switched up the presentation in different parts of the proposal. So thank you. I'm going to open it up to public comment for 2 minutes each. And if you guys, the public as well, and commissioners, remember page 6 is where the staff recommendations are that Amy read to us, if you need that as reference. Recording secretary, are there any public comments?
Just allowing a moment, and I do not see any requests for public comment.
Okay. Gonna give it a second as well. All right, so the public comment period for this item is now closed. Do commissioners have any questions or comments on this item? Okay, we'll start with Commissioner Gross and Commissioner Greno-Shire, and then Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you to Commission staff for this very thorough report and presentation this afternoon. I had a question regarding the language on the minor revisions to assessment design standards. In 1D, there's a reference to the phrase special needs. And I think that's inconsistent with the rest of the descriptions of describing students as students with disabilities. And I know that this is an area within the disability population and disability field where there's really this emphasis to shift the language and to recognize that special needs is a euphemism and that isn't that's detrimental to many people with disabilities. So I'm wondering about that phraseology, since I don't see it elsewhere, and if that's something that we could also update to reflect kind of current understanding about disability practices.
Yes, just Megan, would you direct me to which? I'm not finding it real quickly here. And would you recommend exactly what you recommend to change the language to? We would be happy to do that.
So it's in item 1D on page 7 of the PDF. The model sponsor must include about the underserved groups and students. It says, as currently says, and students with special needs in the general education classroom.
And
Students with disabilities.
You would like to replace it with students with disabilities?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for your work on this endeavor.
Thank you for all of your support and also being a liaison to the group. So we really appreciate your insight and all the expertise you bring to the group. So thank you, Commissioner Gross.
Thank you as well. Commissioner Grenoshire, and then we have Commissioner Brown, and I see that Commissioner Simmons also has added. So just want to make sure I acknowledge him.
Thank you, Commissioner Martinez. I have one question and then a couple of comments. Amy, the appendix that has the 25 institutions that offer dual credential programs, I'm interested in understanding when those programs were developed. Are they a result of our efforts to develop and to support dual credential programs? I know, for example, Cal State San Marcos has been there forever, but I'm curious as to whether there are new programs on that list.
Commissioner Grenoshire, actually, I'll respond to that if I may. The information that is contained in that appendix is the information current from the 2019-2020 annual data submission system, or the ADS system that's in the Commission's reports. In that particular item, there were 2 programs that had recently been approved to offer, and I believe that they were I believe it was, if I'm remembering correctly, I think UC San Diego was one, and then another one was the Concordia University. I could be off in my recollection of that, but I know that 2 of the institutions were recently granted the approval in 2021. And so we took the evidence that we had in our ADS system, and that's where we gathered that information as current for what the programs are offering at this time. If you would like,
James,
I'm sorry, Commissioner, I would say if you would like further information, I could gather that for you and work with our accreditation department and send that along to give you further information.
I don't want to give you more work to do than you already have, but I would.
I don't mind. I don't mind.
I would be really curious over time to see the results of our vision to develop more inclusive teacher preparation program, which are now supported by these staff recommendations about having candidates who pursue more than one credential only having to complete 1 TPA. So no homework this time, James, but if we could just keep track of this over time, I think that would be of great interest.
And I agree. And I think as we go into the field test, I think we probably would have more information as we have more programs participate.
Great, thank you. And then just a couple of comments. I really appreciate the work that the staff did to develop this agenda item. And this is another time that I wish I was a voting member so I could move to support these staff recommendations, not to influence my fellow colleagues, but this work really supports our initial thinking about developing more inclusive teacher preparation programs, which result in teachers who can work with all learners. So I really, really support this motion. And I think the way the staff has, and of course the work group that has supported these recommendations, I think having candidates complete only one TPA in the highest, not the highest, what is this, in the
most
specialized area, is going to help EPPs to recruit candidates into these pathways. So I am just so excited about this. And again, I thank you for all of your work on this.
Thank you. And your comments will, of course, have a positive influence on us, as you are such an amazing liaison for our teacher preparation program. So thank you for that. Commissioner Brown?
I also really appreciate this as an early childhood person who really is supportive of this work, dovetailing with each other. I also have a question about the commission approved credential programs, Mr. Webb. I noticed that the credential pathways listed include, is that bilingual? BILA?
Yes.
BILA?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And I know that you, and thank you for the clarification, Amy, that the low incidents, the 3 low incidents are not part of this. Does that mean that there are no dual or multiple credential programs that offer any of the 3, or they just happen not to be listed because it isn't part of this presentation?
That is correct. At this time, we did not list any of the lower incident areas that would be considered because it was not in the item. However, to give you an example, there is at University of California at San Diego, the DHH program there does offer a dual credential of a multiple subject and a DHH credential. So that is one that I can, off the top of my head, can provide to you. But again, we would bring forward that information to the commission when we have the additional year for further study.
Yeah, appreciate that. And then I'm as supportive as I am of this, I just have to ask this question. How do you know that a teacher can teach in a general ed class simply because they've met the expectations, but they haven't been assessed on it? I just wanted to thinking about how I would answer that, but I wanted to hear from.
Great question. Yep. So periodically throughout the item, we talk about the universal TPEs, and what that's a little bit difficult maybe to understand. And if we had like more time and paper and could show you a PowerPoint, I could lay them all next to each other for you, and you could look at how many are common across. It's at least 2/3 or more that are identical between the gen ed expectations of TPEs and the education specialist, mild to moderate, and ESN. And 5 or 6 years ago, when they were building out the TPEs for the 5 credential specialist areas for ed specialist work, that was purposefully done so that the majority of the pedagogy and the majority of the expectations as laid out in our teaching performance expectations for both our gen ed teachers, multiple subjects and single subject, and our 5 credential areas, except for the low incidence areas, have this kind of crosswalk and set of identical TPEs. And so we believe there's an argument to be made that if you demonstrate the your pedagogy within the ESN frame or within the mild to moderate frame, that you are also then demonstrating the gen ed TPEs. And so we would say that you are ready. Now, let's always remember, a teaching performance assessment is one of 3 major accomplishments a candidate must demonstrate before they're recommended for any credential at all. And that is coursework and clinical practice. And in multiple credential areas, it's multiple clinical practice settings, and then a TPA.
I remember that work being done these last 5 years ago, and 4 and 3 and now. So believe me, I support that. But one of the reasons I asked the question was just to bring that
Oh, thank you.
on it one more time, because not all of us have been here over these last years. And I'm also cognizant of the description in Appendix C, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for asking the question.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. I'm going to go to Commissioner Simmons and then Commissioner Sloan, unless Commissioner or Chair Sloan, if you have a very similar question.
If you don't mind, I just wanted to respond to that. Commissioner Simmons, do you mind? I only wanted to add too, as a reminder, that in addition to our performance assessments, we have program embedded assessments that programs report on, and the program embedded assessments are measuring TPEs, all of the other TPEs that may not be measured in the performance assessment that the candidates do for that credential. So there are multiple kinds of assessments that candidates engage in. Programs are required to gather data on those assessments. They're required to understand not only whether the candidates have met all of the TPEs across all programs, but also use that to inform their practices.
Thank you for adding to that. Commissioner Simmons?
I appreciate Chair Sloan bringing that up, because I also have a great deal of respect for program assessments. I think programs do a wonderful job with that. But I also want to thank Amy and James for doing this. I'm just so pleased that you're here to do this, because it's so complicated and you both have such history with assessments. As I started to go through this, I was trying to even figure out how I would ask my questions. And I came basically to kind of set theory that if you look at the universe of candidates, there are candidates who get multiple credentials consecutively and concurrently. In the consecutive group, there are those who have got credentials prior to TPA and after TPA. Those are kind of like Ryan's and 2042s or late 2042s. That's the way I'm looking at the consecutive people. The concurrent people are either in a dual program, or they just happen to be taking two programs. They're dual enrolled as opposed to enrolled in a dual program. Do I have those 4 categories right?
I believe that I understand exactly what you said, and there are those 4 categories. James, is David missing anything? It's complicated.
It is complicated, and what we always try to anticipate is as many situations as possible, but we possibly could be missing one. But I do believe you've probably identified the major areas.
Okay, so within the universe of candidates that this recommendation is related to are the 4th category that I said, that those which are in dual programs, which are listed for the most part in Appendix B. So when I say a dual program, is my understanding of a dual program is that in their program design where that they got approved, those candidates are simultaneously seeking the credential and they're taking integrated coursework and all of that, even though when they send the recommendation to the commission, there are 2 separate applications that they will send, one for the mod and one for the multiple subject.
Right. Yes. David, absolutely correct.
Okay, so the recommendations here are limited to those who are in dual programs. If that's what I'm hearing, then it seems to me that the language in 2 through 4 shouldn't say that they are seeking both credentials. It should be the same language in recommendation 1, correct? Where it says the candidate in a dual program consisting of ESN and multiple subject would take the ESN TPA. Would that be more clear?
I think, Yeah, I think you have put your finger on perhaps a group we did not address in this item yet, and we need to think about them. And that goes to your question about if you're not in a dual program, however, you are pursuing 2 credentials, even though it's not an acknowledged dual program. What happens with those folks?
My
That's
major
what you're asking,
field
right?
is UC Santa Barbara. And UC at Santa Barbara is not on this list because they don't have a dual program.
Right.
But there are candidates who have dual enrollment in 2 separate programs.
Okay, so my understanding of that, and you help me understand this, would be that the program gives equivalencies to those candidates. They're not literally taking 120 hours, right? They're taking a set of courses and they're being double counted, when appropriate, of course, towards both credentials. Am I correct in what you're saying to me?
Yeah, so if we're accepting these recommendations to cover anybody who's getting their credentials simultaneously, we wouldn't be impacting the institution's ability to grant equivalencies.
So it's going to be really complicated because candidates who are ambitious in that way and pursuing dual credentials and taking a lot of coursework and getting working with their institution of higher ed, their approved program, to get those equivalencies acknowledged. It will depend on the clinical setting they're in at the time. I think the recommendation from our design team would be, if you are pursuing a mild to moderate and a gen ed credential in this way, the preference would be that you demonstrate your TPA in the mild to moderate setting, the area of specialization. Okay, that would be the preference from our design team. Forward for your consideration. I think that's the same if it were a mild to moderate ESN and gen ed pursuer trying to get all of those credentials done. Again, let's have the candidate, advise the candidate to take the TPA in the most specialized credential area because of the overlap of the universal TPEs. Now, what you're posing to us is a question of, would we know this? Who would guide the candidate, and how do we get these candidates to take that most specialized credential? Am I correct in understanding your question?
And add a little bit further that I trust programs to provide that assistance.
Correct. So we would want to put out perhaps the guidance to programs that this is how we're handling dual credential pursuers. The question perhaps that we need to get into the record here for consideration is, do we need to have some way to truly understand these candidates who are not in dual programs but pursuing more than one credential to make sure that they're taking a TPA in the more specialized setting? Is that what you're proposing?
This is what I would say is not. And
okay, you would go the other way and say, let them make the best decision.
This is my reasoning. As we talked about the classified grant yesterday, life gets in the way. And when people are simultaneously getting with 2 credentials, I've worked with people doing this for 30 years.
Yes.
They get pregnant, they get cancer, they get their job change. And what started out to be a simultaneous actually turned out to be consecutive. So I really would not want to micromanage that from Sacramento. I would much prefer programs, approved programs in their wisdom, to be able to make the appropriate recommendations.
I would like to turn the conversation over to Erin Skubal, who wants to have a chance to add her thinking.
Thanks, Amy. I did just want to add, I think that we do have some work to do in ironing out the details on how we would bridge from a general education credential holder to a special education credential holder, or vice versa. Now that we have this common trunk and we're going to have this TPA for education specialists. So, David, I'm sure you well know that we have the 80499 process for general education credential holders, and they have regulatory language that allows them to move from one credential into the other in that general education realm. And so we need to do some work on identifying what those requirements might be for the education specialist credential holders who have taken a TPA under this new umbrella, and then they move into the general education credential world, or vice versa. If you have a multiple or a single subject credential and you've already taken the TPA and then you want to bridge into the special education world, what does that look like? And David, as you mentioned, that population that may have earned their single or multiple subject credential without having taken TPA, what does that look like? So those are some details that I think we still need to have conversations about and iron out. And so I think that this is really good to kind of get your take on, where does the program have the place, and then where does the commission have the responsibility to check for those requirements? And are we approaching this as a, one TPA is sufficient? If you've taken a TPA 10 years ago for your multiple or your single, is that sufficient? Are we confident that that individual has the knowledge, skills, and abilities to move into the additional credential area? So just put that out there. I think we have future conversations to have about that for sure.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. And really, we were trying to get at some of exactly those questions on page 5 that we'll come back to. But David, you have launched us into this complex dialogue, so thank you.
Can I
and
just,
Mary would like to add, please.
I'd just
Mary.
like to add one thing and simply say that that everything that Erin Skubal just said is kind of prelude to saying there will be regulatory package coming forward to clarify these things, which is how we get very specific about what the commission is requiring and not requiring. So getting a conceptual check in with the commission right now is really quite important so that we have the direction we need to write those regulations. Just thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank all of you. I have Chair Sloan and Commissioner Greno-Shire, which I imagine might want to address the same issue. Yes.
Marquita go, because mine is a different question.
Great. All right. Marquita.
Thank you. I want to thank Commissioner Simmons for his, once again, demonstration of his deep understanding of the weeds of this work. I didn't even think about it, David, until you were describing it. So thank you very much. I also want to encourage 2 guiding principles. One, again, David mentioned this, we trust our EPP colleagues to make these decisions. I think that's really critical. And then secondly, we allow for as many degrees of freedom to our colleagues to implement this. So thank you.
Thanks. Chair Sloan?
I had a question regarding our other TPAs that we use in the state and how our recommendations and decisions here impact the Ed TPA, for instance.
So yes, in the world of teaching performance assessments, it is allowable for anyone who wants to bring forward a teaching performance assessment for consideration by the Commission for adoption for use as a model sponsor, following those assessment design standards that we discussed in this item. So we have 3 currently approved teaching performance assessments in California. We have the Commission's model, the Cal TPA, and the developing the Ed Specialist Cal TPA, and of course, remember, we're also developing an early childhood TPA. We have, therefore, the opportunity for others to come forward and ask for approval of their special education specialist TPA models if they would like to. So we know through communication with our colleagues who also have general ed TPAs that at least the Ed TPA consortium group out of Stanford is interested in bringing forward a education specialist model so that they have one. And in the meantime, or if in fact no one does come forward, and then they would have the Commission's model. So we are hoping that other programs will come forward with their models and they would be approved as well. so that if you were an institution using the EdTPA for your general education candidates, you would have the option to also use the EdTPA for education specialist, mild to moderate, ESN, and potentially the 3 lower incidence areas. That work, I believe, is underway, and we will be having it, come forward at some point in the future. So now, will other groups come forward? That could be. We don't know. We have the opportunity, though, in California for multiple models to be approved for use to meet the teaching performance requirement.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands. Oh, no, I do. Okay. Commissioner Grenishire.
I'm sorry, but
No apologies whatsoever.
I'm just looking at what page is this? Page 6 with the bolded language changes. And I'm wondering if James can help me to understand, given our focus on inclusive teacher preparation, given our focus that special education is not a place, it's a set of supports and services. I'm wondering if that term specialized settings sends the wrong message. And I would be curious to understand what the thinking of the work group is on this.
Commissioner Grenishire, that's a very interesting point, and it was added in the way that it structured because of the general education classroom, and I believe our thinking was around the idea of the clinical placement and where a candidate would be possibly serving in their role as a special or an education specialist candidate. I do believe, and I completely agree, that we and the design team have really focused on that special education is not a placement. It is instead a series of services that support a student to be successful. And so therefore, I would invite, and along with Amy, if specialized services could work for the assessment design standards to be inclusive of the concern, but also in terms of a clinical practice placement to ensure that we have adequately addressed what the model sponsor would have to demonstrate with a performance assessment.
Do you have any recommendation of how you would change the language, Marquita?
I sure would like to have a little bit of time to think about this, Amy and James, and maybe come back with a friendly amendment. But I appreciate that the design team was focused on that special education is not a place, and we know that. But I also appreciate your comment about how do we differentiate where the placement is happening. Do we have to decide that today?
Amy, I don't think that language was in the recommendation specifically, was it?
No.
Oh, it was, so
we
I don't
need a
think
friendly amendment, right? We have options as always. So today you could give me language and then you could all determine if that language is okay, or we could come back with language in August. That might delay things a little bit for some who are trying to meet these assessment design standards. I'm looking at this and wondering if we just put a period. So if it read like this: the model sponsor must include within the design of the TPA candidate tasks a focus on addressing the teaching of English learners, all underserved education groups, or groups that need to be served differently. Period.
I think,
and leave off the setting issue and assume that all settings count. All settings matter. It doesn't matter what the setting is.
I was wondering if Commissioner Simmons had if this was about the same topic and if you had a recommendation.
I would take Amy's, but I think if you don't include, I would put the period in a different place.
Okay.
I think that if you don't include students with special needs, then it's not, I guess it's an underserved educational group or group that needs to be served differently. But I think you still have to include to adequately assess the candidate's ability to effectively teach all students.
Okay.
And I would just like to add that Commissioner Gross did make a recommendation that we would write students with disabilities instead of students with special needs.
That does it for me, Amy. Once again, thank you, David.
And thank you, James, for that reminder.
So I want to can I just read this back then? Or David, how about we do it this way? Would you read to us again what you're recommending? Just the whole thing so we get it straight.
I think what I heard you say was the model sponsor must include within the design of the TPA candidate tasks a focus on addressing the teaching of English learners, comma, all underserved education groups or groups that need to be served differently, comma, then adding in Megan's and students with disabilities to adequately assess the candidate's ability to effectively teach all students.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Simmons and Commissioner Grenoshire. Very helpful. Amy, does that work? Do you have that?
I have that. I have taken notes, and if that is your will, then we can make those edits.
And if there are unintended consequences of that, we'll bring it back in August for a further amendment.
Okay. And if I'm sorry, Dr. Sandy, and Commissioner Simmons, if I can just make sure I clarify, because most likely I will be the one writing this, so I just want to make sure. I think what the intention is that we're saying it runs across all areas, whether it's general education, education specialists, because we do want to be inclusive, because we know that there are so many different areas, hospitals, incarceration. We just wanted to make sure that we include all of that and don't, as Dr. Sandy said, inadvertently exclude a possible setting or situation that a candidate may be in.
The one that always comes to mind is the School of the Deaf. We don't want to exclude particular programs.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Chair Schlo? Did you want to get on this?
To entertain a motion?
Yes, please.
To channel Commissioner Grenoshire and say that a motion to adopt the staff recommendations 1 through 5. That includes the amended language to 1D of the assessment design standards.
Thank you. And do I have a second? Okay, Commissioner Jackson. Okay. Any other discussion? Okay. Will the recording secretary call for the vote? Each member please respond with aye, nay, or abstain.
Jose Cardenas,
Aye.
C. Michael Cooney,
Aye.
Michael De La Torre, Marisol De La Torre Escobedo,
Aye.
Megan Gross,
Aye.
Johanna Harwick,
Aye.
Susan Aradia,
Aye.
Perry Jackson,
Aye.
Bonnie Clark,
Aye.
Monica Martinez,
Aye.
David Simons,
Aye.
Tina Sloan.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Mr. Webb and Mr. Racing. We're going to move to